You've been taught that explaining yourself protects you. That clarity comes from saying more, from defending your intentions until everyone understands. But if that were true, why do explanations still leave you drained? Why do people still misunderstand you, no matter how carefully you speak? Why does your mind keep replaying what you should have said long after the moment has passed? The truth is, silence protects what explanations never will. Inner peace does not come from being understood. It comes from no longer needing to be. Silence is not emptiness, it is power. And Buddhist wisdom has carried this truth for centuries. The more you try to control how others see you, the more restless you become. But the more you return to stillness, the more grounded, unshaken, and free you feel. Tonight, as you listen, something will begin to quiet inside you. The urge to explain will soften. The noise in your mind will slow down. You'll feel a deeper calm, like water settling after being disturbed. And when you wake up tomorrow, you will see silence differently, not as something missing, but as something protecting you. This is not just another audio to fall asleep to. This is the beginning of inner peace. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something shifts the moment the words stop. Not outside, but inside. A quiet space opens, and for the first time, there is nothing to defend, nothing to fix, nothing to prove. And yet, this is exactly where most people become uncomfortable. Because silence reveals something that constant explaining hides. How much has been given away without even noticing. Right now there is a pattern that has been running quietly in the background for years, a habit so normal it feels invisible, the habit of explaining, clarifying, justifying, again and again, and it seems harmless, even responsible. But beneath it, something deeper is happening, something that slowly drains your stability without asking for permission. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep cannot fix. Not physical, not obvious, but heavy in a quiet way. It shows up after conversations where nothing really went wrong, yet something still feels off. Words were spoken, explanations were given, and still there is a lingering sense of depletion, as if something important was spent, but nothing meaningful was gained in return. This is where the energy leak begins. It does not start with big moments. It starts small. Someone misunderstands your intention and you step in to correct it. That feels natural. Then they question you again and you respond with more detail. Still reasonable. Then the conversation stretches and suddenly you find yourself repeating the same point in different ways, hoping clarity will land this time. But instead of feeling resolved, something inside becomes restless. Not because the situation is complicated, but because your energy is being pulled outward. Every explanation carries attention, and attention is not free. It is one of the most valuable things you have. Where it goes, your inner state follows. When you explain beyond what is necessary, you are not just using words. You are investing your stability into an outcome you cannot control. And that is where the drain becomes invisible, because on the surface it feels like you are being responsible, communicative, mature, but underneath you are slowly training your mind to depend on being understood in order to feel settled. And the more you repeat that pattern, the more fragile your peace becomes. Think about how quickly your mood can shift based on how someone responds to your explanation. If they agree, there is relief. If they push back, there is tension. If they ignore it, there is frustration. Your inner state begins to rise and fall, not based on truth, but based on reaction. And over time, this creates a subtle instability, because your peace is no longer anchored within you. It is tied to how well your words are received. Buddhist wisdom speaks quietly about this kind of attachment, not just attachment to things, but attachment to outcomes, to being seen a certain way, to being interpreted correctly. When the mind becomes attached to these, it loses its stillness. It starts chasing resolution outside instead of resting within. and explaining becomes one of the main ways this chase happens. There is also a deeper layer that most people never notice. Over-explaining often comes from a place that feels honest, but is rooted in fear. The fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being judged, the fear of being seen incorrectly. So the mind tries to control the narrative. It adds more context. It softens the message. It adjusts the tone. It searches for the perfect combination of words that will finally make everything clear. But the truth is, no amount of explanation can fully control how another person perceives you, because they are not listening from your mind. They are listening from theirs. They filter your words through their own experiences, their own expectations, their own emotional state. And because of that, clarity is never guaranteed. Even the most perfect explanation can be misunderstood. And yet, the mind keeps trying, not because it works, but because it hopes. This is where the exhaustion begins to build, because you are putting effort into something that has no stable return. You are investing energy into perception, which is always shifting. And the more you try to stabilize it through explanation, the more unstable it becomes. This is why silence holds a different kind of power. Silence does not try to control interpretation. It does not chase agreement. It does not negotiate for understanding. It simply allows things to be as they are. And in that allowing, your energy stays with you. There is no need to repeat, no need to defend, no need to reshape your truth to fit someone else's lens. Silence creates a boundary, not with force, but with presence. A boundary that says, without words, this is where I stand. Whether you understand or not, it remains the same. That kind of silence is not avoidance. It is alignment. It comes from knowing that your truth does not become stronger by being explained repeatedly, and it does not become weaker by being misunderstood. It simply is. When you begin to see this clearly, something changes in how you communicate. You start to notice the moment where explanation shifts into over-explanation. It feels different. There is a slight tension, a subtle urgency, a need to make sure the other person gets it. That moment is the turning point. Most people move past it without awareness, continuing to speak, continuing to justify. But if you pause there just for a second, you will see the pattern. And in that pause, you have a choice. You can continue explaining, or you can return to stillness. At first, choosing silence may feel uncomfortable. The mind may tell you that you are leaving things incomplete, that you should say more, that you need to fix the misunderstanding. But if you stay with the silence, something deeper begins to emerge. A sense of steadiness. Because you are no longer chasing resolution outside, your attention returns inward. And with it, your energy stabilizes. You are no longer reacting, you are resting. This does not mean you stop communicating. It means you communicate with intention, not compulsion. You say what is needed clearly and simply, and then you allow space. You do not chase agreement. You do not force understanding. You do not repeat yourself to exhaustion. And slowly, the energy leak begins to close. Another shift happens as well. When you stop over-explaining, people feel it. Not always consciously, but something changes in the dynamic. There is less room for back and forth, less opportunity for your words to be picked apart, less access to your internal state. Because over-explaining often reveals more than just information. It reveals insecurity. It shows that your position is open to negotiation. And once that signal is sent, others may push further, question more, test boundaries. But when you speak once with clarity and then become silent, the signal is different. It communicates certainty. Not arrogance, not resistance, but grounded certainty. And grounded certainty does not invite endless questioning. It creates space. This is one of the quiet ways silence protects you, not by shutting others out, but by keeping your center intact. There is also a mental effect that is often overlooked. When you over-explain, the conversation does not end when the words stop. It continues in your mind. You replay what you said. You think about what you should have added. You imagine how the other person interpreted it. The explanation extends beyond the moment. It becomes a loop, and that loop consumes attention long after the situation has passed. But when you choose silence, the loop shortens. There is less to analyze, less to revisit, less to carry forward. The mind has less material to work with, and so it settles more easily. Peace becomes more accessible, not because everything is resolved, but because nothing is being held unnecessarily. This is where the real value of silence becomes clear. It is not just about what you avoid saying. It is about what you stop carrying. Every unnecessary explanation is something the mind has to process, store, and revisit. And over time, this creates mental noise. Silence reduces that noise. It simplifies your inner world. It allows you to move through situations without accumulating emotional residue, and that is a different kind of freedom. A freedom that does not depend on being understood. A freedom that does not require constant clarification. A freedom that comes from knowing when enough has been said. There is also a deeper level of trust involved. When you stop over-explaining, you are trusting that your truth does not need constant reinforcement. You are trusting that those who are meant to understand will understand, and those who are not will not. And both are okay. This is not indifference, it is acceptance. Acceptance that you cannot control how others perceive you, and more importantly, you do not need to. Because your peace is not built on their perception, it is built on your alignment, and alignment does not require explanation, it requires awareness. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You begin to notice conversations differently. You become aware of where your energy goes. You see the moments where you would normally explain more, and you choose not to, not out of suppression, but out of clarity. And each time you make that choice, something strengthens within you. A quiet confidence, a steady presence, a sense of control that does not come from dominating the conversation, but from mastering your own response. Over time, this changes how you experience interactions. They become lighter, less draining, less complicated, because you are no longer trying to manage how you are seen, you are simply being. And that simplicity carries a kind of peace that words cannot create. This is why silence protects what explanations never will. Because explanations try to shape the outside, silence stabilizes the inside. And once the inside is stable, the outside loses its power to disturb you. So as you move forward, begin to watch the pattern. Notice when the urge to explain arises. Notice what it is connected to, and then gently step back, not to withdraw, but to return. Return to your center. Return to your stillness. Return to the place where nothing needs to be proven, because that is where your energy belongs. And the more you stay there, the more you will understand something that cannot be taught through words. That peace is not something you create by speaking more. It is something you uncover by needing to say less. And as that quiet awareness deepens, something even more surprising begins to reveal itself. It is not just that speaking less protects your energy. It is that not everything true inside you needs to be spoken to remain true. There is a deeper layer of silence, one that is not about restraint, but about understanding. And once this is seen clearly, the need to express every thought, every feeling, every realization begins to fade on its own. Something within starts to ask a different question, not, how do I explain this, but, does this even need to be said? There is a subtle kind of pressure most people carry without noticing. A pressure to express everything they feel, everything they think, everything they realize. It feels almost automatic, like a reflex. A thought arises, and immediately there is a pull to put it into words. A feeling surfaces, and there is an urge to communicate it. As if truth only becomes real once it is spoken. But this is where something important has been misunderstood. Truth does not become stronger because it is expressed, and it does not become weaker because it is kept in silence. Yet the mind has been conditioned to believe otherwise. From a young age, expression is encouraged. Speak up, share your thoughts, explain your feelings, be clear, be open. And while these things have their place, they have quietly created an imbalance, an assumption that silence means suppression, that not speaking means something is being hidden or avoided. But there is another form of silence that has nothing to do with hiding. It is sacred. Sacred silence is not about holding back out of fear. It is about recognizing that some things lose their depth the moment they are spoken, that not every truth is meant to be translated into words, because words can only carry so much. Think about the moments in life that felt the most real, the most complete, the most undeniable. Those moments often did not need explanation. There was no urge to describe them, no need to break them down. They were simply experienced, and that experience was enough. But the mind, being restless, often interrupts that completeness. It tries to capture the moment in language, to define it, to share it. And in doing so, it slightly distorts it, because words are limited. They reduce something vast into something manageable. And while that can be useful for communication, it is not always useful for truth. There is a difference between what can be said and what can only be known. Sacred silence exists in that difference. It is the understanding that some truths are meant to be held, not expressed, not because they are secret, but because they are complete in themselves. They do not need validation. They do not need confirmation. They do not need to be seen by others to exist. They simply are. This changes how you relate to your inner world. Instead of rushing to express every realization, you begin to sit with it, to feel it fully, without the need to translate it. And in that stillness, the truth deepens, because it is no longer being shaped for others. It is being experienced directly. There is also a quiet strength that comes from this. When you no longer feel the need to share everything, your inner space becomes more protected, not closed, but contained. And that containment allows your awareness to grow without interruption. Most people scatter their attention by constantly expressing. Every thought becomes a conversation. Every feeling becomes a discussion. And over time, this creates a kind of fragmentation. Their inner world is no longer whole. It is divided into pieces that have been explained, interpreted, and reacted to by others. But when you practice sacred silence, something different happens. Your inner world remains intact. It is not pulled apart by external opinions. It is not reshaped by other people's interpretations. It stays rooted. And from that rootedness, a deeper clarity emerges. You begin to see that not all truths are meant to be shared equally. Some are personal, some are temporary, some are still unfolding, and speaking them too early or to the wrong person can dilute their meaning. It can expose something that is not ready to be seen. This is why discernment becomes important. Not every listener is prepared to receive every truth. Not every space is suitable for every expression. And recognizing this is not about being guarded. It is about being aware. There is a kind of wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, not out of fear, but out of respect for the truth itself. Because truth is not just about accuracy, it is about timing, context, readiness. And when these are not aligned, even the most honest words can create confusion. This is something that becomes clear through observation. You may have experienced moments where you shared something meaningful only to be met with misunderstanding, not because what you said was wrong, but because it was not received in the way it was intended. And in those moments, there is often a sense of regret. Not for the truth itself, but for expressing it in a space where it could not be held. Sacred silence protects against this. It allows you to wait, to observe, to feel into whether something needs to be spoken at all. And often you begin to realize that it does not, because the need to express was not coming from the truth, but from the ego. The ego wants to be seen. It wants recognition. It wants others to acknowledge what it knows, what it feels, what it has discovered. But truth does not have that need. Truth is quiet. It does not demand attention. It does not seek approval. It exists independently of whether anyone else is aware of it. And when you begin to align with that, your relationship with expression changes. You stop speaking to be validated. You stop sharing to be confirmed. You stop explaining to be understood. And instead, you speak only when it serves something deeper, when it adds clarity, when it creates connection, when it is necessary. Everything else you let remain in silence. There is also a peacefulness that comes from this. When you are not constantly expressing, your mind becomes less active. There are fewer conversations to replay, fewer reactions to process, fewer interpretations to manage. Your inner space becomes quieter, not empty, but calm. And in that calm, you begin to notice things that were previously overlooked. Subtle emotions, deeper insights, quiet understandings that do not need to be spoken to be known. This is where silence becomes more than just the absence of noise. It becomes a way of seeing, a way of being present without the need to define everything, a way of experiencing life without constantly translating it into language. And this has a profound effect on your inner peace. Because the more you rely on words to make sense of everything, the more your mind becomes active. It starts labeling, analyzing, categorizing. But when you allow some things to remain unspoken, the mind begins to settle. It no longer feels the need to process everything. It can simply observe, and in observation, there is stillness. This is why many Buddhist teachings emphasize silence not as a rule, but as a path to seeing clearly, a path to experiencing directly, a path to understanding, without the need for constant explanation. Because the deepest truths are not found in words, they are found in awareness. And awareness does not require language. It requires presence. When you begin to live this way, something shifts in how you relate to others as well. You become less reactive, less eager to respond, more comfortable with pauses. And those pauses carry a different kind of depth. They allow space for reflection, for listening, for understanding beyond what is being said. Because often what matters most is not in the words, but in what is behind them. And silence allows you to access that. It allows you to hear what is not being spoken, to sense what is not being expressed, to connect with something deeper than surface-level communication. This makes your interactions more meaningful, not because you are saying more, but because you are perceiving more. And that perception comes from stillness, not from constant expression. Over time, this creates a different kind of presence, one that is calm, grounded, unhurried, a presence that does not feel the need to fill every space with words. And that presence has an impact. Because in a world where everyone is speaking, explaining, reacting, silence stands out. Not as something empty, but as something full of awareness, full of understanding, full of quiet confidence. And people feel that, even if they cannot explain it. They sense that there is something different, something stable, something that does not need to prove itself, and that, in itself, communicates more than words ever could. This is the essence of sacred silence, not withholding out of fear, not avoiding out of discomfort, but choosing not to speak when speaking would reduce what is already complete. Choosing to let truth exist without needing to display it. Choosing to protect the depth of your inner world by not exposing it unnecessarily. And in doing so, you begin to experience a different kind of peace. A peace that is not dependent on expression. A peace that is not disturbed by misunderstanding. A peace that remains whether anything is said or not. And from that place, your relationship with truth becomes clearer. You no longer feel the need to share everything. You no longer feel incomplete if something remains unspoken. You no longer feel that silence is a gap that needs to be filled. Instead, you begin to see it as something that holds, something that protects, something that allows truth to remain untouched. And as this understanding deepens, something else begins to dissolve. The illusion that explaining yourself will always bring clarity, because the next layer reveals something even more unexpected. That sometimes, the more you explain, the more misunderstood you become. And as that quiet respect for silence settles deeper within, something even more unsettling begins to surface. It is the realization that speaking more does not always bring clarity. And in many cases, it does the opposite. What once felt like the solution slowly reveals itself as part of the problem. Because the more you try to explain, the more something slips out of your control. There is a strange frustration that comes when you know exactly what you mean, yet somehow, the more you explain it, the less it is understood. The words feel right as they leave you, clear, honest, direct. But by the time they reach the other person, something has already changed. The meaning feels distorted, the intention feels lost, and suddenly you are no longer explaining, you are correcting, and then correcting the correction. This is where the illusion of clarity begins. It starts with a belief that if you just say it better, if you just add more detail, if you just find the perfect words, everything will finally make sense. But instead of creating understanding, it often creates layers. Layers of interpretation, layers of assumption, layers of meaning that were never there to begin with. Because once words leave you, they are no longer yours. They enter another mind, and that mind does not receive them as they were sent. It reshapes them, it filters them, it adjusts them to fit what it already believes. So even if your explanation is perfect, it does not arrive in a perfect form. It arrives altered. This is something most people never fully accept. They believe misunderstanding is a result of poor communication, that if they could just express themselves more clearly, everything would align. But the truth is more subtle than that. Misunderstanding is not always a failure of words. It is often a difference in perception. Two people can hear the same sentence and walk away with completely different meanings. Not because one is right and the other is wrong, but because each is listening from a different place. Different experiences, different expectations, different emotional states. And no amount of explaining can completely bridge that gap. Yet the mind keeps trying. It believes that clarity can be forced through repetition, that more words equal more understanding. So it adds examples, expands the explanation, changes the phrasing, hoping that something will finally click. But something else happens instead. The more you explain, the more room there is for misinterpretation. Because every additional word creates another opportunity for the meaning to shift. A simple truth becomes complex. A clear message becomes layered. And what started as something straightforward becomes something that needs to be untangled. This is the hidden cost of over-explaining. It does not just drain your energy, it weakens your message. Because clarity is not about quantity, it is about precision. And precision is often lost when there are too many words. Think about the moments where something was said simply, directly, without excess. Those moments often carry more weight. Not because they are louder, but because they are focused. There is no room for confusion, no space for interpretation, just a clear point that stands on its own. But when that point is surrounded by too many explanations, it begins to blur. The listener is no longer sure what matters most. The message loses its center. And this creates a strange paradox. The more you try to make something clear, the less clear it becomes. Because clarity is not built through expansion. It is built through simplicity. There is also an emotional layer that influences how explanations are received. When you explain yourself repeatedly, especially in situations where there is tension, your words are not just being heard, they are being felt. And if there is any hint of defensiveness, urgency, or frustration, that emotion becomes part of the message. The listener may not even focus on what you are saying. They focus on how you are saying it, and that can change everything. A calm statement can be received as aggression if the listener is already on edge. A neutral explanation can be taken as justification if the listener is expecting a defense. A clear truth can be dismissed if the listener has already formed a judgment. This is why explaining more does not guarantee being understood. Because understanding is not only about words, it is about the state of the person receiving them. And that state is something you cannot control. This is where the illusion begins to break. The realization that clarity is not something you can force through explanation. It is something that either exists or does not. And when it does not, adding more words rarely fixes it. In fact, it often makes it worse, because it creates a dynamic where you are chasing understanding instead of standing in truth. You begin to adjust your message based on how it is received. You start refining, reshaping, rephrasing, trying to match the listener's perspective. And in that process, something subtle happens. You move away from your original clarity, not intentionally, but gradually, until eventually you are no longer expressing what you truly meant. You are expressing a version of it that has been adapted to fit someone else's lens. And that version is rarely as clear as the original. This is how explaining can create more misunderstanding, not because the intention is wrong, but because the process becomes distorted. The focus shifts from truth to reception, from clarity to approval, from expression to persuasion, and in that shift, the message loses its integrity. There is also a psychological effect that reinforces this pattern. When you feel misunderstood, there is a natural discomfort, a tension that pushes you to resolve it. The mind does not like open loops. It wants closure. It wants alignment. So it tries to fix the misunderstanding through explanation. But if the misunderstanding is not rooted in your words, but in the other person's perception, then the explanation cannot fully resolve it. And the loop stays open. So you try again and again, each time hoping for a different result, but instead the loop becomes stronger. More words, more interpretation, more confusion, until eventually the conversation becomes less about clarity and more about control, trying to control how you are seen, trying to control how your words are understood, trying to control something that cannot be fully controlled. And that creates tension because control requires effort, and effort, when applied to something unstable, leads to exhaustion. This is where silence begins to reveal its role again, not as avoidance, but as clarity in itself. When you stop explaining beyond what is necessary, you remove the excess. You return to the core of what you meant. You allow your words to stand without support. And that simplicity carries a different kind of strength. It does not try to convince. It does not try to adapt. It simply exists. And whether it is understood or not, it remains unchanged. This is where true clarity comes from. Not from how much you say, but from how grounded you are in what you say. Because when you are grounded, you do not feel the need to expand your message endlessly. You trust that what needs to be understood will be understood, and what is not does not need to be forced. There is also a deeper acceptance involved. The acceptance that not everyone will understand you, not everyone will see your intention clearly, not everyone will interpret your words as you meant them, and that is not a failure, it is a reality. Once this is accepted, the pressure to explain begins to fade, because you are no longer trying to achieve something impossible. You are no longer trying to create perfect alignment in a world of different perspectives. You are simply expressing what is true for you and allowing the rest to unfold naturally. This does not mean you stop communicating. It means you communicate with awareness. You choose your words carefully. You say what is needed, and then you stop. You do not chase the response. You do not fill the silence. You do not add more just because there is a pause. You allow the message to settle, and that settling creates space. Space for the other person to process. Space for meaning to form. Space for clarity to emerge without being forced. This is something that is often overlooked. Silence after speaking is part of communication. It allows the words to land. But when you keep adding more, you interrupt that process. You do not give the message time to be received. You keep reshaping it before it has a chance to be understood, and that can create confusion, even if the original message was clear. So part of letting go of the illusion of clarity is learning to trust the pause, to trust that what you have said is enough, to trust that understanding does not need to be pushed, to trust that clarity is not created through pressure. And this trust changes everything. It removes the urgency. It removes the need to control. It removes the compulsion to explain endlessly. And in that removal, something else appears, a sense of ease, a sense of space, a sense of calm that does not depend on being understood, because you are no longer chasing clarity outside. You are resting in clarity within, and from that place, communication becomes lighter, more natural, less forced. You speak when there is something to say. You remain silent when there is not. You do not try to fix every misunderstanding. You do not try to control every interpretation. You allow things to be. And in that allowing, your energy remains intact. Your mind remains steady. Your presence remains grounded. This is the deeper understanding behind the illusion of clarity, that explaining more does not always bring understanding, that words are not always the bridge we think they are, that sometimes the more we try to make things clear, the more we complicate them, and that true clarity does not come from how much is said. It comes from how much is unnecessary, is left unsaid. As this becomes clear, another layer begins to unfold. Because beyond explanation, beyond clarity, beyond even being understood, there is a deeper kind of power. A power that does not come from speaking, but from not needing to justify what you feel. And that is where something even more personal begins to shift. And as that realization settles in, something even more personal begins to surface. It is no longer just about words, or clarity, or being understood. It moves deeper into a place most people rarely question, a place where emotions live, and where power is often quietly given away without awareness. Because once the need to explain begins to fade, another pattern becomes visible, the need to justify how you feel. A feeling rises inside you, and almost immediately there is a subtle pressure to explain it, to make it reasonable, to make it acceptable, to make sure it can be understood by someone else before you allow yourself to fully stand in it. And without noticing, your emotional world becomes something you feel you have to defend. But something shifts the moment you stop doing that. There is a quiet discomfort that appears when you feel something strongly, yet cannot easily explain why. It could be a sense of unease around someone, a sudden loss of interest in something that once mattered, a boundary that forms without a clear reason. And in those moments, the mind begins searching for justification. It asks questions. Why do I feel this way? Is this valid? Will this make sense to others? Should I explain it better? And before you know it, the feeling itself is no longer the focus. The explanation becomes the priority. This is where emotional sovereignty is lost. Because the moment you feel the need to justify your emotions, you place their legitimacy outside of yourself. You begin to believe that a feeling is only valid if it can be explained clearly, if it can be understood logically, if it can be accepted by others. But emotions do not follow logic in that way. They arise from layers that are deeper than words. They are shaped by experiences, by patterns, by subtle perceptions that the conscious mind cannot always articulate. And trying to force them into neat explanations often distorts them. You end up explaining something that was never meant to be explained. And in doing so, you move away from the truth of what you feel. This creates a disconnect. Instead of being present with your emotion, you are analyzing it. Instead of allowing it to exist, you are trying to make it acceptable. And that shift may seem small, but it has a powerful effect. Because when you stop trusting your emotions unless they are justified, you begin to doubt yourself. You begin to question your instincts. You begin to override what you feel with what seems reasonable. And over time, this weakens your inner authority. You no longer feel grounded in your own experience. You feel dependent on explanation, dependent on validation, dependent on making sense. But emotional sovereignty is the opposite of that. It is the ability to feel something fully without needing to explain it to anyone, including yourself. It is the quiet confidence that what you feel is real, even if it cannot be translated into words. It is the understanding that your emotions are not on trial. They do not need to be defended. They do not need to be approved. They do not need to be understood by others to be valid. They simply need to be acknowledged. This changes how you relate to yourself. Instead of questioning every feeling, you begin to observe it. Instead of trying to justify it, you allow it. Instead of seeking external confirmation, you stay with your internal experience. And in that staying, something stabilizes. Because you are no longer moving away from yourself in search of clarity. You are returning to yourself in acceptance. There is also a deeper layer to this. When you feel the need to justify your emotions to others, it often comes from a desire to be seen in a certain way, to be perceived as reasonable, as fair, as logical. You want your feelings to make sense, not just to you, but to them. And that desire shapes how you express yourself. You soften your words. You adjust your tone. You add explanations. You try to make your emotion fit into something that can be easily understood. But in doing so, you may be diluting what you actually feel. You are not expressing the emotion itself. You are expressing a version of it that has been filtered for acceptance. And that version is not always accurate. This is why some conversations leave you feeling unsatisfied, even when you said everything you needed to say. Because what you said was not fully aligned with what you felt. It was adjusted, edited, presented in a way that would be received well. And that creates a subtle tension, a sense that something was left out, something was not fully honored. Emotional sovereignty removes that need. It allows you to feel without editing, to express without over-explaining, to stand in your emotional experience without needing to justify it. This does not mean you become reactive or impulsive. It means you become grounded. You recognize that your emotions are information, not arguments. They are signals, not statements that need to be defended. And when you treat them this way, your relationship with them changes. You stop trying to prove them. You start listening to them. This creates a different kind of awareness. You begin to notice patterns in your emotions, not to explain them away, but to understand their presence. You see how certain environments affect you, how certain people influence your state, how certain situations trigger responses that are deeper than the surface. And instead of needing to explain these patterns to others, you simply acknowledge them. You adjust your behavior accordingly. You set boundaries. You make choices, not because you can justify them perfectly, but because they align with what you feel. This is where real power begins to emerge, because you are no longer waiting for your emotions to make sense to someone else before acting on them. You trust your internal experience. You respect your own signals. You move in alignment with yourself. And that alignment creates stability. There is also a quiet freedom in this. When you no longer feel the need to justify your emotions, conversations become lighter. You do not feel the pressure to explain every reaction. You do not feel the need to convince others that your feelings are valid. You simply express what is necessary and allow the rest to remain within you. This reduces conflict, not because disagreements disappear, but because you are no longer trying to win emotional arguments. You are not trying to prove that your feelings are right. You are simply acknowledging that they exist. And that changes the dynamic. Because when you stop defending your emotions, others have less to push against. There is less friction, less resistance, more space. This also protects your energy. Justifying emotions is exhausting. It requires mental effort, emotional effort, constant adjustment. But when you stop doing that, your energy remains with you. You are not spending it on explanations that may not be received. You are not draining it in conversations that go in circles. You are conserving it, and that conservation leads to clarity. Not the kind that comes from explaining, but the kind that comes from being grounded. There is another subtle shift that happens. When you no longer justify your emotions, you become less influenced by how others react to them. If someone disagrees, it does not shake you. If someone does not understand, it does not destabilize you. Because your emotional experience is no longer dependent on their response. It stands on its own. This creates a sense of independence, not isolation, but self-reliance. You are not disconnected from others, but you are not controlled by their perceptions. You can engage, communicate, connect without losing your center. And that is what emotional sovereignty truly is. It is not about suppressing emotions. It is not about ignoring them. It is about owning them without needing to justify them. There is also a deeper peace that comes with this. When you stop analyzing every feeling, the mind becomes quieter. There are fewer internal debates, fewer questions about whether something is valid, fewer attempts to explain yourself, even internally. You simply feel and allow and move on. This reduces mental noise. It creates space. And in that space, your awareness becomes clearer. You begin to see that not every emotion needs a story. Not every feeling needs a reason. Some are simply responses, natural, temporary, passing. And when you do not attach to them through explanation, they pass more easily. They do not linger. They do not become something you carry. They arise, they are felt, and they fade. This is a different way of experiencing emotions, not as problems to solve, but as experiences to move through. And this way is lighter, less complicated, more aligned with inner peace. Because peace is not found in controlling emotions. It is found in not being controlled by the need to explain them. As this becomes clearer, your sense of self begins to shift. You feel more stable, more grounded, less reactive, more aware. And from that place, your interactions change, your decisions change, your presence changes, because you are no longer operating from a place of needing to justify. You are operating from a place of knowing what you feel, knowing what aligns, knowing what does not, and acting accordingly, without needing to explain every step. This is where silence deepens again, not just as a way of protecting your energy, but as a way of protecting your emotional space, because not everything you feel needs to be shared. Not everything you experience needs to be explained. Some things are meant to remain within you, not hidden, but held with awareness, held with respect, held without the need for external validation. And in holding them, you strengthen your connection to yourself. You become less dependent on others to define your experience. You become more rooted in your own awareness, and that rootedness is what creates lasting peace. Not the absence of emotion, but the absence of the need to justify it. And as this understanding settles, something else begins to form. A boundary that does not need to be spoken. A presence that does not need to defend. A quiet strength that does not need to explain. Because the next layer of silence is not just about what you say or feel. It is about what you allow and what you no longer allow, and that is where something even more protective begins to take shape. And as that inner stability begins to take root, something new starts to form quietly beneath the surface. It is not loud, not forceful, not something that needs to be announced, but it is there. A shift in how you allow others into your space. A subtle change in what you respond to, what you engage with, what you no longer entertain. Because once you stop explaining your emotions, once you stop justifying your inner world, the next question naturally arises. What do you allow to reach you at all? There is a kind of peace that cannot exist without protection. Not protection through confrontation, not protection through control, but protection through quiet boundaries that do not need to be spoken to be real. Something inside begins to feel different. Situations that once pulled you in no longer have the same grip. Words that once triggered a reaction now pass through without leaving a mark. And it is not because the world has changed. It is because your access points have. There is a boundary there now, not visible, not declared, but deeply present. Most people think boundaries must be explained. They believe that for a boundary to be respected, it has to be announced, defended, repeated. But there is another kind of boundary that works in a different way. A quiet boundary, one that is not built through words, but through behavior, through what you respond to, through what you ignore, through what you allow to continue and what you quietly step away from. And this boundary is often stronger than any spoken one, because it is not dependent on agreement. It does not require understanding. It does not need to be accepted by others to exist. It simply functions. There is a pattern that becomes clear when you observe how people interact. They test limits, not always intentionally, not always consciously, but it happens. They say things, do things, push in certain directions, and then watch how you respond. Your response teaches them where the line is, not your words, not your explanations, your response. If you react every time, if you engage every comment, if you explain every boundary, you are giving them access. You are showing them that your attention is available, that your energy can be pulled, that your space is open. But when you stop responding to what does not align, something changes. The access begins to close, not through resistance, but through absence. And that absence is powerful, because it sends a message without saying anything. It shows that not everything deserves your attention, that not every action requires a response, that your peace is not something that can be easily interrupted. This is how silence builds invisible walls, not by blocking others out, but by filtering what reaches you. You become selective, not in a harsh way, not in a defensive way, but in an aware way. You begin to notice what drains you, what disturbs your inner state, what pulls you into unnecessary engagement. And instead of reacting, you withdraw your attention. Not dramatically, not with explanation, simply by not participating. This is where many people struggle, because they feel that not responding is rude, that silence needs to be justified, that if they do not explain their boundary, it will not be respected. But in reality, constant explanation often weakens boundaries, because it invites negotiation, it opens the door for debate, it creates space for others to question, to push, to test further. But a quiet boundary does not invite negotiation. It does not explain itself. It does not defend itself. It simply exists. And because it exists consistently, it becomes clear, not through words, but through patterns. People begin to understand what you tolerate and what you do not. Not because you told them, but because you showed them. There is also a deeper shift that happens internally. When you rely on silence to maintain your boundaries, you are no longer seeking permission to protect your space. You are not asking for understanding. You are not waiting for agreement. You are acting from self-respect, and that self-respect changes how you move through the world. You become less reactive, less available to unnecessary conflict, less affected by external behavior, because your boundary is not based on controlling others. It is based on controlling your own engagement. This is an important distinction. You cannot control what others say or do, but you can control how much access they have to you. And silence is one of the most effective ways to manage that access. It removes you from dynamics that do not serve you. It prevents situations from escalating. It keeps your energy from being pulled into places it does not belong. And over time, this creates a different kind of environment around you. One that is calmer, more stable, less chaotic, because you are no longer feeding into what disrupts you. There is also a quiet confidence that develops. When you stop explaining your boundaries, you stop seeking validation for them. You no longer feel the need to justify why something bothers you, why you choose not to engage, why you step away from certain situations. You simply do. And that simplicity carries strength, because it shows that your decisions are not dependent on external approval. They are grounded in your own awareness. This makes your presence more stable, more consistent, more difficult to disturb, and that stability influences how others interact with you. Not because you demand respect, but because you embody it. People sense when there are limits, even unspoken ones. They feel when access is restricted, when attention is not easily given, when reactions are not easily triggered. And that changes their behavior. Not always consciously, but it happens. Because the dynamic has shifted. You are no longer participating in everything. You are no longer responding to everything. You are no longer available for every interaction. And that creates space. Space for your peace to exist without interruption. There is also a deeper layer to this boundary. It is not just about others. It is about your own habits, your own tendencies, your own impulses. Because sometimes the greatest disturbances come from within. The urge to check, to respond, to engage, to react. And silence can be applied here as well. Not just in communication, but in action. You begin to notice the moments where you would normally respond, where you would normally explain, where you would normally get involved, and instead you pause. You allow the moment to pass without engagement, and in that pause, something changes. The impulse weakens, the need fades, the reaction dissolves. This strengthens your boundary from the inside, not just in how you deal with others, but in how you deal with yourself. You become less controlled by immediate reactions, less driven by habitual responses, more aware of where your energy goes, and more intentional about where it stays. This creates a deeper sense of control, not over others, but over your own experience. And that is where real peace begins. Because peace is not about eliminating disturbances, it is about not allowing them to take hold. And quiet boundaries are what make that possible. They act as filters. They prevent unnecessary noise from entering your space. They keep your attention focused on what matters. They protect your inner state without needing to fight for it. This is very different from aggressive boundaries. Those require effort. They involve confrontation. They create tension. But quiet boundaries do not. They are effortless. They do not push. They do not resist. They simply do not engage. And that lack of engagement is often more powerful than any reaction, because it removes the energy that fuels conflict. Without energy, there is nothing to sustain it. It fades on its own. This is something that becomes clearer with practice. At first, it may feel uncomfortable not to respond, to remain silent when something invites reaction, but over time, it becomes natural. You begin to see that not every situation needs your involvement, not every comment needs your attention, not every behavior needs your response. And this realization brings relief, because you are no longer carrying the weight of constant engagement. You are no longer responsible for managing every interaction. You are simply choosing where to place your energy and where not to. This choice is what builds the boundary. Not a line drawn in words, but a pattern of behavior. A consistent way of being that communicates without speaking. And that consistency is what makes it effective. Because it is not temporary. It is not situational. It is stable. It does not change based on mood. It does not shift based on pressure. It remains. And that stability is what protects your peace, not by isolating you, but by grounding you, by creating a space where your inner state is not easily disturbed, where your attention is not easily pulled, where your energy is not easily drained. And in that space, something deeper begins to grow. A sense of calm that is not fragile. A sense of control that is not forced. A sense of presence that is not dependent on external conditions. This is the result of quiet boundaries, not something you declare, something you live. And as you continue to live this way, something else begins to unfold. Because once your boundaries are established, once your space is protected, once your energy is no longer leaking outward, you begin to notice how much power there is in not reacting at all. Not just in protecting your peace, but in transforming how situations unfold around you. And that is where silence reveals another layer of strength. One that does not come from what you say, but from what you choose not to respond to. And as those quiet boundaries begin to hold their shape, something even more revealing comes into view. It is not just about what you allow or what you ignore. It is about what happens in the exact moment you feel pulled to react and choose not to. Because there is a space, small but powerful, that appears between what happens to you and how you respond. Most people never notice it. They move too quickly. A word is spoken, and the reaction follows. A tone is felt, and the defense rises. A judgment is sensed, and the explanation begins. But once your boundaries are no longer built on words, once your silence begins to protect your space, that space between stimulus and response becomes visible. And inside that space, your power returns. There is a moment that most people lose every single day, a moment so quick it feels like it never existed, a moment between being triggered and reacting. And in that moment, something very subtle happens. The ego wakes up, not loudly, not dramatically, but with urgency. It wants to defend, it wants to correct, it wants to restore its image, it wants to protect how it is seen, and it does this through reaction, through words, through explanation, through immediate response. It feels necessary, it feels justified, it feels like the only natural thing to do. But what is rarely seen is that this reaction is not strength. It is habit, a conditioned movement of the mind that has been repeated so many times, it feels automatic. And because it feels automatic, it feels right. But something changes the moment you pause, the moment you feel that urge rise and do nothing. There is discomfort there at first, a tension, a sense that something is being left incomplete. The mind starts to push. It tells you to respond, to say something, to not let it slide, to not be silent, because to the ego, silence feels like loss. It feels like defeat. It feels like giving up control. But in reality, silence in that moment is not loss. It is control. It is the decision to not be moved by impulse, to not be controlled by the immediate need to react, to not allow your state to be dictated by something external. This is what non-reactivity truly is. Not suppression, not avoidance, but conscious stillness. A choice to remain centered, even when something invites you to step out of that center. And this choice changes everything. Because when you react, you enter the situation. You become part of the energy. You feed it. You extend it. You allow it to grow. But when you do not react, the energy has nothing to attach to. It meets stillness. And in that stillness, it begins to dissolve. This is something that becomes clear through experience. You may have noticed that some situations escalate quickly, not because of what was said initially, but because of how it was responded to. One reaction leads to another. One defense leads to another. And before you know it, something small has become something heavy. But if even one side remains still, the situation changes. There is no fuel, no continuation, no momentum, and often it ends much sooner. This is the quiet power of non-reactivity. It does not fight, it does not resist, it simply does not engage. And that lack of engagement is what gives it strength. Because it cannot be pulled, it cannot be provoked easily, it cannot be controlled through emotional triggers. And that makes it stable. There is also a deeper shift that happens internally. When you stop reacting immediately, you begin to see your own patterns. You notice what triggers you. You see what pulls your attention. You become aware of the thoughts that arise, and instead of being inside them, you are observing them. This creates distance, Not emotional distance from life, but awareness of your internal movements. And in that awareness, you gain clarity. You see that not every thought needs to be followed. Not every feeling needs to be expressed. Not every trigger needs a response. This reduces unnecessary action. It simplifies your experience, and it allows you to move through situations with more control. Not control over others, but control over yourself. And that is where real strength lies, because anyone can react. It requires no effort, no awareness, no discipline, but not reacting. That requires presence. It requires the ability to stay with discomfort without immediately trying to change it. It requires trust that silence is not weakness, that not responding is not losing, that stillness is not passivity. And once you begin to trust this, your relationship with conflict changes. You no longer see it as something that needs to be addressed immediately. You no longer feel the pressure to respond in the moment. You allow space, you allow time, you allow yourself to remain grounded. And from that grounded place, if a response is needed, it comes differently. It is not reactive, it is intentional. It is not driven by emotion, it is guided by awareness. This is an important distinction. Non-reactivity does not mean you never respond. It means you choose when and how to respond, not based on impulse, but based on clarity. And that clarity comes from silence, because silence gives you time to observe, time to process, time to understand what is actually happening beyond the surface. Without that time, responses are often based on assumptions, on initial reactions, on incomplete information. But with silence, the picture becomes clearer, and from that clarity, your actions become more precise, more aligned, more effective. There is also a shift in how others perceive you. When you do not react easily, when you are not pulled into every situation, when your responses are measured and intentional, people begin to see you differently. Not as someone who can be easily influenced, not as someone who can be easily triggered, but as someone stable, someone grounded, someone not easily moved. And this changes the dynamic, because people tend to push where there is movement. They test where there is reaction, but when there is stillness, there is less to push against, less to provoke, less to engage with, and that reduces unnecessary conflict. Not because people stop being who they are, but because your response no longer feeds into it. This also protects your energy. Reacting constantly is exhausting. It requires attention, emotional involvement, mental processing. But when you reduce unnecessary reactions, your energy remains more stable. You are not being pulled in different directions. You are not being drained by constant engagement. You are conserving your attention. And that conservation leads to clarity, because your mind is not overloaded. It is not filled with reactions, responses, replays. It is quieter, more focused, more present. And in that presence, your experience becomes different. You are not constantly responding to life. You are experiencing it, observing it, moving through it with awareness. And that awareness brings a different kind of peace. Not a passive peace, not a detached peace, but an active stillness, a stability that remains even when things around you are not stable. This is what Buddhist teachings often point toward. Not the absence of events, but the absence of disturbance within them. The ability to remain centered, regardless of what arises. And non-reactivity is one of the key ways this is developed, because it trains the mind to not move automatically, to not follow every impulse, to not be controlled by every trigger. It creates space, and in that space there is freedom. Freedom from habitual reactions, freedom from emotional loops, freedom from being pulled into unnecessary situations. And this freedom is not something external, it is internal. It comes from how you relate to what happens, not from what happens itself. As this becomes clearer, your interactions become more intentional. You speak less, but with more meaning. You respond less, but with more clarity. You engage less, but with more awareness. And this creates a different presence, one that is calm, one that is steady, one that does not need to prove itself through reaction, because it is grounded in something deeper, something that does not move easily. And that grounded presence is felt, even without words, because silence, when it comes from strength, communicates something that words cannot. It shows that you are not controlled by the situation, that you are not dependent on reaction, that you are stable. And that stability is powerful, not in an aggressive way, not in a dominant way, but in a quiet, unshakable way. The kind of strength that does not need to announce itself, it is simply there. And as you continue to practice this, something becomes more natural, the pause becomes easier, the silence becomes comfortable, the need to react becomes weaker, and your presence becomes more grounded, more aligned, more at peace, because you are no longer moving with every wave. You are steady beneath them, and from that steadiness, everything changes, not outside, but inside. And that inner change reflects outward, in how you speak, in how you respond, in how you carry yourself, because you are no longer reacting from ego. You are responding from awareness, or choosing silence when no response is needed. And that choice, that simple, quiet choice, is where your power lives. And as that quiet strength of non-reactivity begins to settle, something else starts to reveal itself. It is no longer just about what you choose not to respond to. It is about what happens when you do speak. Because even when there is no reaction, there can still be disturbance, not from others, but from the weight of your own words. There is a kind of tension that lingers after speaking too much, a subtle heaviness that does not come from what was said, but from how much was said. And slowly, it becomes clear that not all harm comes from loud conflict. Some of it comes from unnecessary expression. There is a noise that does not come from the outside world. It comes from within. A constant movement of thoughts turning into words, words turning into conversations, conversations turning into something that never fully settles. And the more this movement continues, the harder it becomes to find stillness, because every word carries energy. And when too many words are used without awareness, that energy becomes scattered. This is the part most people overlook. They believe speaking is neutral, that words are just tools for communication, but words are not neutral. They shape your inner state. They influence your attention. They affect how your mind moves. When you speak more than necessary, your mind does not return to stillness easily. It keeps moving, it replays, it analyzes, it continues the conversation long after it has ended. And this creates a kind of inner disturbance, not obvious, not dramatic, but persistent. It is like throwing stones into calm water again and again. Each word creates a ripple, and when the ripples never stop, the water never becomes still. This is what unnecessary words do. They disturb the natural stillness of your mind. There is also a deeper layer to this disturbance. Speaking too much often comes from a need to fill silence, a need to be heard, a need to be seen, a need to connect. And while these needs are human, when they are expressed without awareness, they create imbalance. Because the more you speak to satisfy these needs, the more dependent you become on the act of speaking itself. You begin to feel uncomfortable in silence. You feel the urge to fill every pause, to respond to every moment, to add something, even when nothing needs to be added. And this creates a habit of constant expression. But constant expression does not create peace. It creates noise, and that noise does not stay outside. It enters your inner world. It becomes part of your mental environment. There is also a subtle loss that happens when you speak too much. You lose depth, because depth requires space. It requires silence. It requires moments where nothing is said, where something is simply felt or observed. But when every moment is filled with words, there is no space for depth to form. Everything stays on the surface, quick, immediate, reactive. And over time, this makes your inner world feel shallow. Not because there is nothing there, but because there is no room for it to settle. There is no space for understanding to deepen. There is no pause for awareness to grow. This is why silence is often associated with wisdom. Not because silent people know more, but because they allow more to settle. They give space for thoughts to mature, for emotions to stabilize, for understanding to deepen without interruption. And this space creates clarity, a clarity that cannot be achieved through constant talking. Because clarity is not created through more words, it is revealed through less noise. There is also an emotional impact to unnecessary words. When you speak without awareness, you often say things that do not need to be said. Small comments, quick reactions, unnecessary opinions. And each of these can create subtle consequences. They can affect how others feel. They can create misunderstandings. They can add tension to situations that were previously calm. Not because there was intention to harm, but because there was no awareness of the impact. This is why it is described as a kind of violence, not physical, not aggressive, but disruptive, a disturbance to the natural flow of interaction, a disruption of harmony that could have remained intact if silence had been chosen. There is also a personal consequence. Every unnecessary word adds to your mental load. It creates something that needs to be processed, something that may be revisited, something that may need to be explained or corrected later. And this accumulation builds over time, until your mind is filled with fragments of conversations. Things said, things unsaid, things that could have been left alone, and this creates clutter, mental clutter, emotional clutter, a kind of internal noise that makes it difficult to rest. But when you begin to speak less, something changes. The clutter reduces, the mind becomes lighter, there are fewer things to process, fewer things to revisit, fewer things to carry, and this creates space. Space for stillness, space for clarity, space for peace. There is also a shift in how you listen. When you are not focused on speaking, you become more aware of what is happening around you. You notice details. You pick up on subtle cues. You hear not just the words, but the tone, the pauses, the underlying emotion. And this deepens your understanding because you are no longer dividing your attention between speaking and listening. You are fully present. And that presence changes the quality of your interactions. They become more meaningful, more grounded, less rushed, less filled with unnecessary exchange. Because you are not trying to contribute constantly, you are allowing the moment to unfold. There is also a sense of control that comes from this. Not control over others, but control over your own expression. You are no longer speaking automatically. You are choosing your words. You are aware of when to speak and when to remain silent. And this awareness creates precision. Your words become more intentional, more focused, more impactful, because they are not diluted by excess. They are not surrounded by unnecessary detail. They stand on their own, clear, direct, aligned. This changes how others receive you. When you speak less, people listen more, because your words carry weight. They are not lost in a stream of constant talking. They are distinct, noticeable. And this creates a different kind of communication, one that is not based on volume, but on presence. There is also a deeper sense of respect that develops, not just from others, but within yourself. Because you are no longer reacting through speech, you are responding through awareness. You are not filling space out of habit. You are allowing space to exist, and that allowance reflects a level of self-control, a level of discipline, a level of awareness that strengthens your inner state. This is where harmony begins to return, not because the world becomes quieter, but because your interaction with it becomes more balanced. You are not adding unnecessary noise. You are not contributing to the disturbance. You are maintaining a sense of stillness, even while engaging. And that stillness influences everything. Your thoughts become clearer. Your emotions become more stable. Your presence becomes more grounded, because there is less interference, less movement, less distraction. There is also a deeper realization that emerges, that not everything needs to be expressed, not every thought needs to be spoken, not every feeling needs to be shared immediately. Some things are meant to remain within you, to be observed, to be understood internally, to pass without becoming external. And this realization changes how you relate to your own mind. You stop treating every thought as something that needs to be acted on. You stop giving importance to every impulse. You begin to filter, not through suppression, but through awareness. And this filtering creates calm, because the mind is no longer constantly projecting outward. It is allowed to rest, to settle, to exist without constant output. This is where inner harmony begins to take shape, not as something forced, not as something created through effort, but as something that emerges when unnecessary disturbance is removed, when the noise decreases, when the words become fewer, when the mind is not constantly moving outward. And in that harmony, something else becomes possible, a deeper connection to yourself, a clearer awareness of your internal state, a stronger sense of presence that is not dependent on expression, because you are no longer scattered, you are contained, and that containment creates strength, a quiet strength, one that does not need to be seen, one that does not need to be heard, one that simply exists. And from that existence, your interaction with the world changes. You speak when it matters, you remain silent when it does not. You choose your words with care. You allow silence with ease. And this balance creates something rare, a sense of peace that is not easily disturbed, because you are no longer contributing to the disturbance. You are no longer feeding the noise. You are not adding to the chaos. You are stepping back, not away from life, but away from unnecessary involvement. And in that step back, you gain clarity. You see more. You understand more, you feel more grounded, because your attention is not scattered across constant expression. It is focused, present, aware. This is the deeper meaning behind the violence of unnecessary words. Not that speaking is harmful, but that unconscious speaking disrupts what could have remained peaceful. And once you see this clearly, your relationship with words changes. They are no longer used freely, they are used intentionally, carefully, with awareness of their impact. And this awareness transforms your inner state, because you are no longer creating unnecessary disturbance. You are allowing harmony to remain. And as that harmony deepens, something else begins to unfold, a deeper understanding of when words should be used and when they should not. Because not every moment calls for expression. Some moments call for something else entirely, something quieter, something more aware, something that does not speak, but sees clearly. And as that inner harmony begins to stabilize, something even more refined starts to take shape. It is no longer just about speaking less or avoiding unnecessary words. It becomes something deeper, something more precise. A quiet awareness that begins to ask, not should I speak, but will speaking reduce what is already clear inside me? Because there are moments where words do not add truth, they dilute it. Something subtle begins to unfold when the noise within has settled. A kind of clarity that does not feel loud or urgent, but steady. And within that steadiness, there is a new sensitivity. A sensitivity to how easily truth can be weakened when it is expressed at the wrong time, in the wrong space, or to the wrong mind. There is a difference between truth as it is experienced and truth as it is explained. The moment truth is put into words, it begins to take form. It becomes shaped, limited, translated. And while this can make it easier to communicate, it can also strip away its depth, because words cannot carry everything. They capture only a portion. And when that portion is misunderstood, incomplete, or received without the right context, something that was clear inside you becomes distorted outside of you. This is where discernment becomes essential, not the kind of discernment that judges, but the kind that sees clearly. The ability to recognize when speaking will serve clarity and when it will diminish it. There is a quiet intelligence in knowing that not every truth needs to be expressed immediately, that not every realization needs to be shared, that not every feeling needs to be translated into language. Because sometimes the act of speaking reduces the truth instead of expanding it. This is not always obvious at first. There is often an urge to share something meaningful as soon as it is understood, a desire to express it, to communicate it, to bring it into the world of conversation. And while that desire can come from a genuine place, it can also interrupt the depth of the experience. Because truth, when first realized, is often still unfolding. It has not fully settled. It has not fully integrated, and speaking it too soon can freeze it in a form that is incomplete. It becomes something fixed instead of something alive. This is why silence can act as a form of protection. It allows truth to deepen without interference. It gives space for understanding to grow without being shaped prematurely. It prevents something real from being reduced to something simplified. There is also a relational aspect to this. Not every person is able to receive every truth in the same way. Some listen with openness. Some listen with resistance. Some listen through the filter of their own beliefs, their own experiences, their own limitations. And when truth is expressed in a space that cannot hold it, it often becomes misunderstood. Not because it was wrong, but because it was not received in the way it was intended. This can lead to unnecessary conflict, unnecessary explanation, unnecessary distortion. And over time, this can weaken your connection to your own truth, because you begin to adjust it, to reshape it, to make it more acceptable, more understandable, more aligned with how others see things. And in doing so, something original is lost. This is where discernment becomes protective. It helps you recognize when silence is more aligned than expression, when holding something within preserves its integrity, when speaking it would only create confusion or reduction. This is not about withholding out of fear. It is about choosing expression with awareness. It is about understanding that timing, context, and receptivity all matter. That truth is not just about what is said, but about when and how it is shared. There is also an internal dimension to this discernment. It is not only about how others receive your words, but about how your own mind processes them. When you speak something, you hear it in a different way. It becomes external. It becomes something that can be analyzed, questioned, interpreted. And sometimes, this externalization creates doubt. What felt clear internally begins to feel uncertain once it is spoken, because now it is subject to reaction, to feedback, to interpretation, and that can influence how you relate to it. This is why some truths are better left unspoken, at least for a time, not because they are fragile, but because they are still settling. They are still becoming clear within you, and speaking them too soon can interrupt that process. Silence allows them to mature, to stabilize, to become something that does not shift based on external response. There is also a simplicity in this approach. When you are not constantly expressing everything, your inner world becomes less complicated. You are not managing multiple interpretations. You are not adjusting your understanding based on how others respond. You are simply observing what is true for you and allowing it to remain clear. This creates a sense of stability, a sense of groundedness that is not dependent on communication, because your truth is not something you need to explain to maintain. It is something you live, and that lived truth carries more weight than any explanation ever could. There is also a shift in how you engage in conversations. You become more selective, not in a restrictive way, but in a conscious way. You listen more, you observe more, you speak when there is alignment, when the space is right, when the words will serve rather than reduce. And when that alignment is not there, you remain silent, not out of avoidance, but out of clarity. This changes the quality of your interactions. They become more intentional, more meaningful, less filled with unnecessary exchange. Because you are no longer speaking out of habit, you are speaking out of awareness, and that awareness creates depth. There is also a quiet confidence that develops. When you trust your discernment, you no longer feel the need to express everything to feel valid. You do not feel incomplete if something remains unspoken. You do not feel the pressure to explain your understanding. You are comfortable holding it within, and that comfort reflects a deeper sense of self-trust, a trust that your experience is real, even if it is not shared, a trust that your understanding does not need external confirmation, a trust that silence is not emptiness but fullness, fullness of awareness, fullness of clarity, fullness of presence. This is where silence becomes more than just absence. It becomes a form of intelligence, a way of navigating situations with precision, a way of preserving what matters without unnecessary exposure. There is also a protective aspect to this. When you do not express everything, you maintain a level of privacy, not secrecy, but protection. You are not giving away every detail of your inner world. You are not exposing every thought, every realization, every feeling. You are keeping certain things within, and this creates a sense of safety, not from others, but within yourself, because your inner space is not constantly being opened, examined, interpreted. It remains yours, untouched, undisturbed, and that undisturbed space is where clarity continues to grow, where awareness deepens, where understanding becomes more refined, without interruption, without distortion. There is also a deeper realization that emerges from this practice. That truth does not need to be defended through explanation. It does not need to be reinforced through repetition. It does not need to be validated through agreement. It stands on its own. And when you trust that, your relationship with expression changes. You no longer feel the need to prove your understanding. You no longer feel the need to correct every misunderstanding. You no longer feel the need to make everything clear. You allow space. You allow ambiguity. You allow others to see things differently. And in that allowance, your own clarity remains intact, because it is not dependent on external alignment. It is grounded within. This is the essence of silence as discernment. Not silence for the sake of silence, but silence chosen with awareness. Silence that protects what is clear. Silence that prevents unnecessary distortion. Silence that allows truth to remain whole. And as this becomes more natural, something else begins to unfold. A deeper understanding of where validation fits into all of this. Because beyond expression, beyond discernment, beyond even clarity, there is a subtle trap that keeps many people speaking when silence would serve them better. The need to be understood, the need to be validated. And that is where the next layer begins to reveal itself. And as that quiet discernment begins to guide when you speak and when you remain silent, something even more hidden starts to reveal itself. It is not just about protecting your truth from being reduced. It is about seeing why you feel the need to express it in the first place. Because beneath the urge to explain, beneath the habit of speaking, beneath even the desire for clarity, there is something deeper driving it all. The need to be understood. There is a quiet ache that many people carry without ever naming it. A subtle pull to be seen clearly by others. To have someone look at you and say, "I get you." And when that happens, even briefly, it feels relieving, like something inside you has finally been recognized. But what is rarely noticed is the cost of chasing that feeling, because the moment your peace depends on being understood, it is no longer stable. There is a kind of restlessness that comes from needing others to see you correctly. It is not always loud, it does not always show itself clearly, but it is there, beneath your conversations, beneath your explanations, beneath your reactions. It shows up when you replay what you said, wondering if it came across the right way. It shows up when you feel the need to clarify something again, just in case it was misunderstood. It shows up when someone misinterprets you and you feel a tension that pushes you to correct it. And in all of these moments, your inner state becomes tied to something outside of you, their perception, their understanding, their agreement. And that is where the trap begins, because understanding is not something you can control. No matter how clear you are, no matter how honest you are, no matter how carefully you choose your words, the other person still interprets you through their own lens, their experiences, their beliefs, their emotional state. And because of that, complete understanding is never guaranteed. Yet the mind continues to chase it. It believes that if it can just be explained better, if it can just be expressed more clearly, if it can just find the right words, then finally there will be alignment. But that alignment is fragile, because even if someone understands you in one moment, that understanding can shift in another. It is not fixed. It is not stable. And building your peace on something that unstable creates constant tension. You are always adjusting, always refining, always checking if you are being seen the right way. And this creates a subtle anxiety, not because anything is wrong, but because your inner stability is dependent on external clarity. This is why the need to be understood weakens inner stillness, because stillness requires independence. It requires a sense of self that does not fluctuate based on how others perceive you. It requires a grounding that is not affected by misunderstanding. But when you are caught in the need for validation, that grounding becomes unstable. You begin to shape yourself based on feedback. You adjust your words based on reactions. You refine your expression based on how it is received. And over time, this creates distance from your own truth. Because you are no longer expressing from within. You are expressing toward something, toward approval, toward recognition, toward being understood. And that direction pulls you outward, away from stillness, away from presence, away from yourself. There is also a deeper emotional layer to this. The need to be understood often comes from a place of wanting to feel accepted, to feel seen, to feel acknowledged. And these are natural human desires. But when they become the foundation of your communication, they create dependency, because acceptance is not always given. Recognition is not always offered. Understanding is not always present. And when these are missing, you feel it. You feel the lack. You feel the gap. You feel the tension. And that tension drives you to explain more, to clarify more, to seek that missing validation. But the more you seek it, the more you reinforce the idea that you need it. And that idea keeps you trapped, because it tells you that your experience is not complete on its own, that it needs to be confirmed, that it needs to be understood by someone else to be real. And that is not true. Your experience is complete the moment it is felt. It does not need to be validated to exist. It does not need to be understood to be real. It simply is. But the mind has been conditioned to believe otherwise. To believe that meaning comes from shared understanding, that clarity comes from agreement, that truth is strengthened by recognition. And while there is some connection in these ideas, they are not the foundation of inner peace, because inner peace does not come from being understood. It comes from not needing to be. This is a subtle but powerful shift. When you no longer rely on others to confirm your experience, something inside you stabilizes. You are no longer waiting for a response to feel settled. You are no longer adjusting your expression to gain clarity. You are no longer chasing alignment outside. You are resting in alignment within. And that rest creates stillness, a stillness that is not disturbed by misunderstanding, a stillness that does not fluctuate based on perception. A stillness that remains regardless of how you are seen. This changes how you move through conversations. You speak when there is something to say, but you do not speak to be understood. You express when it is necessary, but you do not express to be validated. You share when it adds value, but you do not share to complete your experience. And this removes pressure, because you are no longer trying to achieve something through communication. You are simply communicating. There is also a freedom in allowing misunderstanding. not as something you prefer, but as something you accept. You recognize that not everyone will see you clearly, not everyone will interpret you accurately, not everyone will understand your intention, and that is okay, because their understanding does not define your truth. This acceptance reduces conflict, not because disagreements disappear, but because you are no longer trying to fix every misalignment. You allow space for different perspectives. You allow others to see things their way, and you remain grounded in your own experience. This creates a different kind of interaction, one that is less reactive, less defensive, less driven by the need to correct, and more rooted in presence. There is also a deeper clarity that emerges. When you are not trying to be understood, your expression becomes more natural. You are not filtering your words to fit a certain perception. You are not adjusting your message to gain approval. You are speaking from alignment, and that alignment is felt, even if it is not fully understood, because authenticity carries a different kind of clarity, one that does not depend on explanation, one that does not need to be justified, one that simply exists. This also protects your energy. Seeking validation is exhausting. It requires constant attention, constant adjustment, constant awareness of how you are being perceived. But when you release that need, your energy returns to you. You are not spending it on managing perception. You are not draining it through constant explanation. You are conserving it, and that conservation creates stability. Your mind becomes quieter. Your emotions become steadier. Your presence becomes more grounded. Because you are no longer being pulled outward, you are centered. This is where inner stillness begins to deepen, not as something you create, but as something that emerges when unnecessary movement stops, when the need to be understood fades, when the urge to explain reduces, when the pressure to validate your experience disappears. And in that stillness, something else becomes possible, a deeper connection to yourself, a clearer awareness of your inner state, a stronger sense of presence that is not dependent on external conditions. Because you are no longer looking outward for confirmation. You are looking inward for clarity, and that clarity is enough. There is also a quiet strength in this. When you no longer need to be understood, you become less affected by misunderstanding. You do not feel the need to defend. You do not feel the urge to correct. You do not feel the pressure to explain. You remain steady. And that steadiness is powerful, not because it dominates, but because it does not move easily. It is not shaken by external perception. It is not influenced by reaction. It is grounded, and that grounding creates a different kind of presence, one that is calm, one that is stable, one that does not need to prove itself, because it is not seeking anything, it is simply being. And from that place, your relationship with silence changes again. It is no longer just about protecting your truth or preserving your energy. It becomes a way of releasing the need to be seen in a certain way, a way of letting go of the desire for validation, a way of returning to yourself without external dependency. And as this becomes clearer, something else begins to shift. Because once you no longer need to be understood, once your peace is no longer tied to validation, you begin to choose something different, not explanation, not approval, but alignment. And that alignment leads into the next layer of understanding, where silence is no longer just protection. It becomes a choice to remain true, even when no one else sees it. And as that need for validation begins to loosen its grip, something deeper starts to settle into place. It is no longer about whether others understand you or whether they agree. It becomes something quieter, something more grounded, a choice to remain aligned with yourself, even when silence is misunderstood. Because once the need to be seen fades, another question begins to rise. Not, do they get me, but am I still being true to what I know within? There is a quiet tension that many people carry without fully recognizing it, a tension between what they feel inside and what they present outside. It is subtle. It shows up in small moments, moments where something feels clear within you, but instead of resting in that clarity, you begin to explain it, adjust it, shape it in a way that makes it easier for others to accept, and without noticing, you start performing. Not in an obvious way, not as something intentional, but as a quiet habit of translating your truth into something more acceptable, something more digestible, something more aligned with external expectations. And every time this happens, a small gap is created, a gap between your inner alignment and your outer expression. At first, this gap feels harmless. It feels like communication. It feels like flexibility. But over time, it creates a subtle disconnection because you are no longer fully rooted in what is true for you. You are partially rooted in how it is received, and that partial rooting weakens your stability because anything built on external approval is unstable. It shifts, it changes, it depends, and the more you rely on it, the more you feel that instability. This is where the shift toward inner alignment begins. Not as a rejection of communication, but as a refinement of intention. You begin to notice when you are about to explain something, not because it needs to be explained, but because you want it to be accepted. You begin to see when your words are not coming from clarity, but from a subtle need to be validated. And in that moment of awareness, you have a choice, to speak or to remain silent. And that silence is not avoidance, it is alignment. It is the decision to not distort what is clear within you just to make it more comfortable for someone else. There is a strength in this kind of silence, a strength that does not come from resistance, but from clarity. Because when you are aligned within, you do not feel the need to perform your truth. You do not feel the need to explain it into existence. You do not feel the pressure to justify it. You simply remain with it. And that remaining creates stability. A stability that is not shaken by disagreement. A stability that does not require approval. A stability that holds, even when there is misunderstanding. There is also a deeper peace that comes with this. When you are not constantly adjusting yourself for others, your mind becomes quieter. There is less internal negotiation, less second-guessing, less reworking of your thoughts to fit external expectations. And this quietness allows you to rest in yourself, not in isolation, but in authenticity, because you are no longer dividing your attention between what you feel and how it is perceived. You are simply present with what is true. There is also a shift in how you experience interactions. When you are aligned within, you do not enter conversations trying to achieve something. You are not trying to convince. You are not trying to be accepted. You are not trying to shape perception. You are simply engaging. And that changes the energy of the interaction. It becomes lighter, more open, less pressured. Because you are not carrying the weight of needing a specific outcome. You are allowing things to unfold as they are. And that allowance creates space. Space for genuine connection, space for difference, space for understanding to arise naturally rather than being forced through explanation. There is also a clarity in recognizing when silence is the most honest response. There are moments where words would only complicate what is simple. Moments where explanation would only dilute what is clear. Moments where speaking would be more about managing perception than expressing truth. And in those moments, silence becomes the most accurate expression. Not because there is nothing to say, but because what is true does not need to be said. This requires trust. Trust in your own clarity. Trust that your understanding does not need to be externalized to be valid. Trust that your silence is not a weakness, but a form of integrity, because you are choosing not to distort what is real within you. There is also a release that happens when you stop performing explanations. You no longer feel the need to justify your decisions. You no longer feel the pressure to explain your feelings in a way that makes them acceptable. You no longer feel obligated to make everything understandable to others. And this release creates freedom. Freedom from constant self-adjustment. Freedom from overthinking your expression. Freedom from the subtle tension of trying to be received correctly. This freedom allows you to move through life with more ease. Not because everything becomes simple, but because you are no longer complicating it with unnecessary explanation. You are not adding layers where none are needed. You are not turning clarity into complexity. You are allowing things to be as they are. And that simplicity creates calm. There is also a deeper form of respect that develops, not just from others, but within yourself. When you choose alignment over approval, you are honoring your own experience. You are acknowledging that what you feel and understand is enough, that it does not need to be reshaped to fit external standards, and this acknowledgement strengthens your sense of self. Because you are no longer seeking permission to be as you are. You are allowing yourself to exist without constant validation. There is also a shift in how others perceive you. When you are not performing, your presence becomes more grounded, more consistent, more real, because there is no gap between what you feel and what you express. There is no effort to manage perception. There is no need to create a certain image, and this authenticity is felt, even if it is not fully understood, because it carries a different kind of energy, one that is not trying to achieve anything, one that is simply present. This presence creates a different kind of respect, not the kind that comes from explanation, but the kind that comes from consistency, from being aligned within yourself, from not shifting based on external pressure, and that respect is more stable, because it is not based on performance, it is based on being. There is also a deeper realization that emerges, that not everything needs to be resolved through communication. Some things are resolved through clarity within, through understanding that does not need to be shared, through acceptance that does not require explanation. And when you see this, your relationship with communication changes. You no longer use it as a tool to fix everything. You use it when it is needed, when it serves, when it aligns, and when it does not, you remain silent. Not as a withdrawal, but as a choice to protect your alignment, a choice to preserve your clarity, a choice to not engage in unnecessary performance. There is also a quiet confidence that grows from this. When you are not dependent on approval, you become less affected by rejection. When you are not seeking understanding, you become less disturbed by misunderstanding. When you are not performing, you become less concerned with how you are perceived. And this reduces internal conflict, because you are not constantly adjusting yourself. You are not trying to meet expectations. You are not shaping your expression to fit a certain response. You are simply being, and that being creates stability. A stability that does not fluctuate based on external conditions. A stability that remains regardless of how you are seen. This is where inner alignment becomes a foundation. Not something you achieve once, but something you return to again and again. A reference point, a grounding, a place within that remains steady. And from that place, your choices become clearer. You know when to speak. You know when to remain silent. You know when explanation serves and when it distorts. And this knowing does not come from rules. It comes from awareness, from being connected to your own clarity, from trusting what you feel within. There is also a deeper peace in this, because you are no longer trying to control how things unfold. You are not trying to manage outcomes through explanation. You are not trying to shape perception through words. You are allowing things to be. And in that allowance, there is less tension, less resistance, less effort. There is simply presence, and that presence is enough. As this becomes more natural, something else begins to reveal itself. A deeper understanding that silence is not just about what you do not say, but about what you refuse to engage with. Because beyond words, beyond explanation, beyond even alignment, there is another layer, one that involves not just expression, but attention. where you place it, where you withdraw it, and that is where the next shift begins. And as that inner alignment becomes stronger, something else begins to shift quietly beneath the surface. It is no longer only about what you say or what you choose not to say. It becomes about what you refuse to engage with at all. Because silence is not just the absence of words, it is the absence of reaction. And when reaction disappears, something unexpected begins to happen. The space you leave behind does not stay empty. It fills itself, and what fills it often reveals more than anything you could have said. There is a moment that feels uncomfortable for most people, a moment where a question is left hanging in the air and no answer comes. No explanation, no defense, no clarification, just silence. And in that silence, something begins to move. There is a quiet discomfort that rises when expectations are not met. When someone expects a response and does not receive it, their mind does not stop. It starts searching, it starts filling the gap, it starts revealing. There is a subtle power in not answering immediately. Not because you are withholding something, but because you are allowing something else to unfold. You are giving space for what is hidden to come to the surface. When people are not met with immediate answers, they begin to show themselves. Their assumptions begin to speak. Their insecurities begin to appear. Their intentions become clearer. Because without your words guiding the direction, they are left with their own. And what they bring into that space says more about them than anything you could have explained. Most people are used to conversations being filled quickly. A question is asked and an answer follows. A statement is made and a reaction comes immediately. This constant exchange creates a rhythm, a predictable flow, and within that flow, much remains hidden, because there is no pause long enough for anything deeper to surface. But when that rhythm is interrupted, when a question is left unanswered, the surface begins to crack. There is a shift, a moment where the other person has to sit with their own thoughts instead of relying on your response. And in that moment, patterns begin to reveal themselves. Some will become impatient, some will become defensive, some will try to fill the silence with more words, some will expose their intentions more clearly. All of this happens naturally, without you doing anything, because silence creates space, and space allows what is hidden to emerge. There is also a deeper psychological movement taking place. When someone does not receive an answer, their mind tries to create one. It begins to interpret, to assume, to project. And these projections often reflect their internal state more than the situation itself. This is why silence can be so revealing, because it removes your influence from the interaction. It allows the other person's mind to move freely, and in that freedom, it shows itself. There is also a difference between answering to clarify and answering to control perception. Many responses are not given because clarity is needed. They are given because there is a desire to guide how the situation is seen, to manage how you are perceived, to shape the outcome. But when you step back from that, when you allow questions to remain unanswered, you release control. And in releasing control, you gain something else: insight. You begin to see how others think without interference. You begin to notice their patterns without your influence shaping them. You begin to understand their intentions without them being adjusted in response to your words. This creates a different kind of awareness, one that is not built on explanation, but on observation. And observation reveals more than explanation ever could. There is also a layer of self-discipline involved in this. The urge to respond is strong. The mind wants to fill silence. It wants to resolve uncertainty. It wants to bring closure, but not every moment needs closure. Some moments are more valuable when they remain open, because in that openness there is movement, there is unfolding, there is revelation, and resisting the urge to close that space requires awareness. It requires recognizing that your immediate response may not serve the deeper understanding that is trying to emerge. It requires trusting that silence has its own function, that it is not emptiness, but space for something real to appear. There is also a shift in how others perceive you when you do not answer immediately. You become less predictable, less easy to read. Not because you are hiding, but because you are not reacting automatically. And this changes the dynamic. People pay more attention. They become more aware of their own words. They begin to consider what they are saying more carefully, because the usual pattern is no longer there. This creates a different kind of interaction, one that is not driven by automatic exchange, but by awareness. And in that awareness, things become clearer. There is also a deeper emotional impact. When someone is not met with an immediate answer, they are forced to sit with their own feelings. There is no quick resolution, no immediate reassurance, no instant feedback, and this can be uncomfortable, but it is also revealing. Because what arises in that discomfort shows what is beneath the surface. It shows what is not being addressed. It shows what is being avoided. And this creates an opportunity, not for you to fix anything, but for you to see clearly, to understand without needing explanation. There is also a sense of power in this. Not power over others, but power within yourself. The ability to not react. The ability to not fill space out of habit. The ability to allow things to unfold without interference. This kind of restraint is rare, because most people are driven by the need to respond, to clarify, to resolve. But when you step outside of that, you gain a different perspective. You are no longer caught in the flow. You are observing it, and that observation creates distance, a distance that allows clarity to emerge. There is also a deeper level of communication that begins to develop, one that does not rely solely on words. Silence becomes part of the conversation, not as absence, but as presence, a presence that holds space, that allows things to settle, that gives room for truth to appear without being forced. And this changes the quality of interaction. It becomes less about exchanging information and more about revealing what is real, because what is real does not always come out through direct answers. Sometimes it comes out through what is left unsaid. There is also a realization that not every question deserves an answer. Some questions are not asked to understand. They are asked to provoke, to test, to control. And answering them gives them power. It feeds the intention behind them. But silence removes that power. It does not engage with the underlying motive. It does not validate the question. It simply lets it exist without response. And in doing so, it reveals the intention more clearly. Because without your answer, the question stands on its own, and what it carries becomes visible. There is also a sense of freedom in not needing to respond to everything. You are no longer pulled into every conversation. You are no longer obligated to answer every question. You choose, you decide, you engage with what aligns, and you leave the rest. And this choice creates space. Space for your attention to remain focused. Space for your energy to remain intact. Space for your mind to stay clear. Because you are not scattering it across unnecessary interactions. You are keeping it where it matters. There is also a deeper trust that develops. Trust in the process of allowing things to unfold. Trust that not everything needs to be managed. Trust that clarity will emerge without constant intervention. And this trust reduces anxiety. Because you are not trying to control every outcome. You are not trying to predict every reaction. You are allowing things to reveal themselves, and that allowance creates calm. A calm that is not forced, but natural. Because it is not based on control, it is based on acceptance. There is also a refinement in how you use your voice. When you do speak, it is intentional, it is precise, it is aligned, because it is not coming from a place of reaction. It is coming from a place of awareness. And this makes your words more impactful, because they are not frequent, they are not automatic, they are chosen. And that choice gives them weight. There is also a deeper understanding that silence is not passive. It is active. It is a choice. It is a way of engaging without interference, a way of allowing truth to surface without shaping it, a way of seeing clearly without adding noise. And this active silence creates a different kind of strength, one that does not need to assert itself, one that does not need to prove anything, one that simply holds space. And in that space, everything becomes more visible, because there is nothing covering it, nothing distracting from it, nothing interfering with it. There is just what is, and that is where clarity lives. As this becomes clearer, something else begins to emerge, a deeper awareness of how silence not only reveals others, but reveals yourself. Because in the absence of reaction, you also begin to see your own patterns, your own impulses, your own tendencies, and that awareness opens another layer, one that moves beyond interaction, into understanding the nature of the mind itself. And as that awareness deepens, something even more personal begins to surface. It is no longer only about seeing others clearly. It becomes about seeing yourself in the moments where you feel the urge to stay, to explain, to hold on, even when you already know it is time to leave. Because clarity does not only reveal what is happening around you, it reveals what you are still attached to. And in that realization, a quiet question begins to rise. Not, what should I say next, but why am I still here? There is a moment that many people recognize, but rarely honor. A moment where something inside becomes still, not peaceful, but certain. Certain that a conversation has ended, even if words are still being exchanged. Certain that a connection has shifted, even if appearances remain the same. Certain that staying longer will not bring clarity, but only prolong confusion. And yet, in that moment, something pulls you to remain, not because you do not see the truth, but because leaving feels incomplete. It feels like something needs to be said, something needs to be explained, something needs to be resolved before you can walk away. This is where attachment reveals itself, not as something obvious, but as a subtle need for closure, a need to leave in a way that feels understood, a need to explain your position so that it is clear, a need to make sure there is no misunderstanding. But what is rarely seen is how this need keeps you connected to what you are trying to leave. Because every explanation extends the interaction, every attempt to clarify reopens the space. Every effort to be understood ties your energy back into the situation, and instead of walking away freely, you carry pieces of it with you. This is why silent detachment is not just about leaving, it is about leaving without carrying, leaving without needing to resolve everything through words, leaving without needing the other person to understand your reasons. There is a difference between physical distance and emotional release. You can walk away from a situation but still replay it in your mind, still think about what you should have said, still feel the weight of what was left unresolved. And this is not detachment, it is delayed attachment. Because even though you are no longer there, your energy remains connected. Silent detachment goes deeper. It is the ability to step away, not only in action, but in mind. To leave without replaying, without revisiting, without holding on to what could have been said. And this requires a different kind of clarity, a clarity that does not seek closure through explanation, but finds closure in understanding, understanding that not everything needs to be resolved through words, that some things are complete the moment you see them clearly. There is also a quiet strength in not explaining your departure. Not because you are avoiding responsibility, but because you recognize that explanation will not change what has already become clear. You see that the situation has reached its natural end, and instead of extending it through conversation, you allow it to close. There is a simplicity in this, a simplicity that removes unnecessary complexity. Because you are not adding layers of explanation. You are not creating more dialogue. You are not opening new paths of misunderstanding. You are simply stepping away. And that simplicity creates lightness. There is less to carry, less to process, less to revisit. But this is not always easy. There is often discomfort in leaving without explanation, a feeling that something is unfinished, a sense that it is not complete. And this discomfort comes from habit, from the belief that every ending needs to be explained, that every departure needs to be justified, that every situation needs to be resolved through communication. But this belief is not always true. Some situations do not benefit from more words. They benefit from less, from space, from distance, from allowing things to settle without interference. There is also a deeper emotional layer, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being seen incorrectly, the fear that leaving without explanation will create a narrative that is not accurate. And this fear pulls you back into explanation. It makes you want to correct, to clarify, to control how you are perceived. But this is where detachment becomes necessary, because if your peace depends on how others interpret your actions, you will never fully release yourself from the situation. You will always be tied to their perception, always adjusting, always explaining, always trying to shape the outcome. And this keeps you connected, even after you have left. Silent detachment breaks this pattern. It allows you to leave without managing perception, to step away without controlling the narrative, to accept that you may be misunderstood and still remain at peace. This acceptance creates freedom, because you are no longer responsible for how others interpret your actions. You are only responsible for being aligned with your own clarity. There is also a shift in how you relate to closure. Closure is often seen as something that comes from conversation, from explanation, from mutual understanding. But true closure does not always come from outside. It comes from within, from recognizing that something has reached its end, from accepting that it does not need to be extended, from allowing it to close without forcing resolution. This kind of closure is quiet. It does not need words. It does not need agreement. It simply happens when you stop holding on. And this is where emotional weight begins to dissolve. Because you are no longer carrying the need to fix, to explain, to resolve. You are allowing things to be as they are. And in that allowance, the mind begins to settle. There is also a deeper understanding that not every connection is meant to be maintained. Not every interaction is meant to continue. Some are meant to pass, to teach, to reveal something, and then to end. And holding on beyond that point creates tension, because you are resisting the natural movement of things. Silent detachment aligns you with that movement. It allows you to move with clarity instead of against it, to leave when it is time, without resistance, without unnecessary attachment. There is also a refinement in how you handle emotions. When you leave without carrying weight, you are not suppressing what you feel. You are not ignoring it. You're allowing it to exist without attaching it to the situation. You feel what is there. But you do not hold on to the story. You do not keep feeding it with thought. You do not keep revisiting it. And this allows the emotion to pass naturally, without becoming something that lingers, without becoming something that defines your state. This is where true lightness begins to appear. Not because nothing affects you, but because you do not hold on to what has already passed. You allow it to move through you, and then you let it go. There is also a quiet dignity in this way of leaving, a dignity that does not seek validation, that does not need to explain, that does not need to justify, because it is grounded in clarity. And that clarity is enough. It does not require external confirmation. It does not need to be understood. It simply is. This creates a different kind of presence, one that is not reactive, one that is not entangled, one that moves with awareness. And this presence influences how you experience everything. Because you are no longer caught in unnecessary loops, you are not replaying conversations. You are not holding on to unresolved moments. You are not carrying emotional weight from situations that have already ended. You are free. Not because nothing happens, but because you do not hold on to what has passed. There is also a deeper trust that develops. Trust in your ability to know when something is complete. Trust in your clarity without needing external confirmation. Trust in your capacity to leave without explanation. And this trust strengthens your inner stability. Because you are no longer dependent on external closure, you are grounded within. As this becomes more natural, something else begins to unfold. A deeper realization that silence is not just a tool for protection or clarity. It becomes a way of moving through life without unnecessary attachment. A way of engaging without becoming entangled. A way of being present without carrying weight. And in that realization, silence becomes something more than absence. It becomes freedom. And as that sense of freedom begins to settle, something more demanding quietly steps forward. It is not about leaving anymore. It is not about stepping away or protecting your space. It becomes something closer, something that happens in the exact moment you feel pulled to react. Because even after detachment, the impulse still appears. The message comes in. The tone feels wrong. The words carry weight. And before any clear thought forms, something inside you moves. A reaction begins to rise. It is fast, almost automatic. A surge of emotion, a rush of interpretation, a need to respond right now. Not later, not after reflection. Now. And in that moment, everything depends on one thing. Whether you act on that impulse or whether you pause. There is a quiet tension that exists in the space between stimulus and response, a fraction of a moment where something inside you has not yet decided what to do. Most people never notice this space. They move straight through it. They react, they speak, they respond without awareness. And because of this, their mind remains untrained. Because every immediate reaction reinforces the same pattern. Something happens. You respond. Again and again, until it becomes automatic. But what is rarely understood is that this automatic response is not strength, it is conditioning. It is the mind acting without awareness. And the more this pattern repeats, the weaker your control becomes. Because you are not choosing your response, you are being carried by it. This is where the discipline of withholding begins, not as suppression, not as resistance, but as awareness. The ability to notice the impulse and not act on it immediately. To feel the urge to respond and allow it to pass without expression. To sit in that moment of tension without needing to resolve it instantly. There is discomfort in this, a kind of internal pressure that builds when you do not release the reaction. It feels like something needs to be done, something needs to be said, and holding back feels unnatural at first. Because the mind is used to movement, used to expression, used to release. But when you remain still in that moment, something begins to change. You start to see the impulse more clearly. You start to recognize that it is not fixed. It rises, it peaks, and then, if left alone, it fades. This is a subtle but powerful realization that not every impulse needs to be acted on, that not every reaction needs to become behavior, that there is a space where you can observe without engaging. And this observation creates distance, a distance between you and your reaction. And in that distance, you gain control. Not control through force, but through clarity. You see what is happening without being consumed by it. There is also a deeper strengthening that happens through this practice. Every time you choose not to react immediately, you weaken the habit of impulsive response. You create a new pattern, one where awareness comes before action, one where you are not driven by the first feeling that arises, but guided by a deeper understanding. And this repetition builds discipline, not as something rigid, but as something natural, a steady ability to remain composed, even when there is pressure to respond. There is also a shift in how you experience emotions. When you do not react immediately, you begin to feel them more clearly, without the distraction of expression. without the movement of action. You sit with them, you observe them, you understand them, and this understanding reduces their intensity. Because you are not feeding them with reaction, you are allowing them to exist without amplification. There is also a clarity that emerges in this space. When you do not respond immediately, you give your mind time to settle, time to move beyond the initial reaction, time to see the situation more fully. And often, what felt urgent in the moment loses its urgency. What felt important becomes less significant. What felt necessary to say no longer needs to be said. This is the power of pause. It reveals what is real and what is reactive. It separates clarity from impulse, and in doing so, it protects you from unnecessary action. There is also a deeper awareness of consequences. Immediate reactions often lead to outcomes that need to be managed later, words that need to be corrected, actions that need to be explained, situations that become more complicated than they needed to be. But when you withhold your reaction, you reduce these outcomes. Because you are not acting from impulse, you are acting from awareness. And this awareness leads to better decisions, more aligned responses, less unnecessary complication. There is also a refinement in how you communicate. When you do speak, it is not rushed. It is not driven by emotion. It is considered, measured, aligned. And this changes how your words are received. They carry more weight, more clarity, more intention, because they are not mixed with impulse. They are chosen. And that choice creates impact. There is also a deeper sense of control that develops. Not control over others, but control over yourself. The ability to remain steady when something triggers you. The ability to not be pulled into immediate reaction. The ability to choose your response instead of being driven by it. This kind of control is rare, because it requires awareness in moments where awareness is often lost. It requires presence when the mind wants to move quickly. It requires discipline when the impulse feels strong. But this discipline is what strengthens the mind. It creates stability, a stability that is not easily shaken. There is also a shift in how others interact with you. When you do not react immediately, the dynamic changes. People become more aware of what they say, more conscious of how they engage, because the usual pattern of instant response is no longer there. And this creates a different kind of interaction, one that is less reactive, less predictable, more grounded, because it is not driven by impulse. It is guided by awareness. There is also a deeper realization that not every situation deserves an immediate response. Some things are better left alone. Some things do not require engagement. Some things lose their significance when they are not fed with reaction. And recognizing this reduces unnecessary involvement. You are not pulled into every moment. You are not responding to every trigger. You are choosing where your attention goes. And this choice protects your energy. It keeps your mind clear. It prevents unnecessary disturbance. There is also a quiet confidence that grows from this. When you know you do not have to react immediately, you feel less pressured, less controlled by external events, less driven by the need to respond. And this creates a sense of ease, a sense of space. Because you are not constantly being pulled into action, you are grounded, centered, present. There is also a deeper connection to yourself. When you withhold immediate reaction, you become more aware of your internal state. You notice what arises. You observe how it moves. You understand it without needing to act on it. And this awareness strengthens your relationship with your own mind. You are no longer reacting to it. You are observing it. And that observation creates clarity. There is also a reduction in regret. When you do not act impulsively, there are fewer moments where you look back and wish you had responded differently. Fewer situations that need to be revisited. Fewer words that need to be taken back. Because your actions are aligned, they are not rushed, they are not reactive, they are chosen. And this reduces internal conflict. Because you are not constantly correcting yourself, You are acting with awareness from the beginning. There is also a deeper understanding that reaction is not necessary for engagement. You can be present without reacting. You can be aware without responding immediately. You can observe without needing to act. And this changes how you move through situations. You are not driven by urgency. You are guided by clarity. There is also a sense of mastery in this, not over others, but over your own responses. The ability to remain composed, to not be pulled into impulse, to choose your actions with awareness. And this mastery creates strength, a quiet strength, one that does not need to be shown, one that is felt internally. Because you know you are not controlled by immediate reaction, you are guided by understanding. As this becomes more natural, something else begins to emerge. A deeper awareness that not only can you choose when to respond, you can choose whether to respond at all. And that realization opens another layer, one that moves beyond timing, into complete freedom from reaction. And as that discipline of withholding begins to feel natural, something even more powerful starts to reveal itself. It is no longer only about not reacting. It becomes about what happens inside you when you choose not to react. Because when the reaction is held back, the emotion does not disappear. It stays, it moves, it waits. And in that waiting, there is a hidden opportunity that most people never see. There is a moment when anger rises that feels almost impossible to ignore. It is sharp, immediate, it carries heat. It pushes you toward expression, toward release, toward saying something that feels necessary in that exact second. And if you follow it, it gives you a brief sense of relief, a moment where the pressure is released. But what follows is rarely peace, because expression driven by anger often leaves something behind. Tension, regret, confusion, and sometimes damage that cannot be taken back. But when that anger is not expressed immediately, something different begins to happen. At first, it feels uncomfortable, like holding on to something that wants to move, like resisting a force that is pushing outward. But if you stay with it, without suppressing it, without acting on it, you begin to notice something. The anger is not static. It changes, it shifts, it transforms. There is a deeper intelligence within emotion that is often missed because it is interrupted too quickly. Anger is not just a reaction, it is information. It carries signals. It points to something that has been crossed, something that feels misaligned, something that requires attention. But when it is expressed immediately, that information is lost, because the focus shifts from understanding to release, from awareness to reaction. Silence creates a different path. It allows the anger to be felt without being projected outward. It allows you to stay with it long enough to see what is beneath it. And often, beneath anger, there is something quieter, something more subtle. Disappointment, hurt, a sense of being misunderstood, a boundary that has been crossed. And when you sit with the anger instead of expressing it, you begin to see these layers. You begin to understand what is actually happening within you. And this understanding changes everything. Because once you see clearly, the need to react begins to fade. Not because the situation has changed, but because your relationship to it has. You are no longer driven by the surface emotion. You are guided by the deeper understanding. This is where transformation begins. Not by removing anger, but by allowing it to evolve, to move from something reactive into something clear. There is also a shift in energy that happens in this process. When anger is expressed outward, it disperses. It moves into the environment. It affects others. It creates reactions. But when it is held in awareness, it stays contained, and that containment allows it to be processed, to be understood, to be transformed. This is not suppression. Suppression is pushing the emotion away, ignoring it, denying it. But silence as transformation is different. It is allowing the emotion to exist without acting on it. It is staying present with it, observing it, understanding it, and through that understanding, it changes. There is also a strengthening that happens through this. Every time you choose to sit with anger instead of expressing it, you build capacity, the ability to hold intensity without being controlled by it. The ability to remain steady when something inside is moving strongly, and this capacity creates resilience because you are no longer overwhelmed by your emotions. You are able to stay with them without being consumed. There is also a clarity that emerges after the initial intensity passes, a kind of calm understanding that was not available in the moment of reaction. You begin to see the situation differently, more objectively, more completely, and this clarity allows for a more aligned response, if a response is even needed, because sometimes, after the anger has settled, you realize that nothing needs to be said, that the situation does not require engagement, that the energy does not need to be extended. And this realization saves you from unnecessary conflict, from words that would have created more complexity, from actions that would have required correction later. There is also a deeper sense of control that develops. Not control over the situation, but control over your internal state. The ability to remain grounded, even when something triggers you. The ability to not be carried away by immediate emotion. The ability to choose how you engage, rather than being driven by impulse. This kind of control creates stability. A stability that is not easily disturbed, because it is not dependent on external conditions. It is grounded within. There is also a shift in how you relate to anger itself. It is no longer something to avoid or suppress. It becomes something to understand, something to observe, something that provides insight into your inner world. And this changes your relationship with it. You are not afraid of it. You are not controlled by it. You are aware of it. And that awareness transforms it. There is also a refinement in how you express yourself when you do choose to speak, because the expression is no longer coming from the peak of emotion. It is coming from clarity, from understanding, from alignment. And this makes your words more effective, more grounded, more precise, because they are not mixed with intensity. They are guided by awareness. There is also a deeper peace that comes from this practice, because you are no longer creating unnecessary disturbance through reactive expression. You are not adding to conflict. You are not feeding situations with emotional intensity. You are allowing things to settle before engaging. And this creates calm. A calm that is not forced, but natural, because it comes from not reacting impulsively. There is also a sense of respect that develops, from others, but more importantly, from yourself, because you know you are not controlled by your emotions. You know you can hold intensity without being driven by it. You know you can remain steady even when something inside is moving strongly. And this builds confidence, a quiet confidence, one that does not need to prove itself, one that is felt internally. There is also a deeper understanding that not every emotion needs to be expressed to be resolved. Some emotions resolve through awareness, through being felt fully without being acted on, through being understood rather than released. And this changes how you process what you feel. You are not constantly seeking expression as a form of release. You are allowing understanding as a form of transformation. There is also a reduction in emotional residue. When anger is expressed impulsively, it often leaves something behind. Something that lingers, something that needs to be addressed later. But when it is transformed internally, there is less residue, because it has been processed, understood, allowed to pass without creating additional layers. This creates lightness, a sense of ease, because you are not carrying unresolved emotional fragments. You are allowing them to move through you completely. There is also a deeper connection to your own awareness. Because you are spending more time observing than reacting. You are becoming familiar with your internal patterns, your triggers, your responses, and this familiarity creates insight, an insight that allows you to navigate situations with more clarity, more precision, more understanding. There is also a sense of mastery that develops, not over others, but over your own internal processes. The ability to take something intense and allow it to become something clear. The ability to transform without needing external expression. The ability to remain centered, even when something tries to pull you outward. And this mastery creates strength. A strength that is not loud, a strength that does not need to be shown, a strength that exists quietly within you. As this becomes more natural, something else begins to unfold. A deeper awareness that silence is not just a way to avoid reaction. It is a way to transform everything that arises within you, and in that realization, silence becomes something more than restraint. It becomes creation, a way of shaping your inner world without needing to control the outer one. And as that inner transformation becomes more familiar, something else begins to reveal itself quietly in the background. It is no longer only about how you handle emotions when they rise. It becomes about what fills your mind when nothing is happening, because even when there is no conflict, no trigger, no pressure to react, there is still movement, a constant stream. Words, thoughts, conversations, internal dialogue that never seems to stop. And slowly it becomes clear that the disturbance you feel is not always caused by what happens around you, but by what continues within you. There is a kind of silence that many people fear without realizing it. Not the silence of the outside world, but the silence within. The absence of constant thought, the absence of internal conversation, the absence of something always happening in the mind. And when this silence begins to appear, even briefly, something uncomfortable follows. Restlessness, a subtle urge to fill the space, to think something, to say something, to engage with something, because the mind has become used to noise, not just external noise, but internal noise. A continuous stream of words that creates the feeling of activity, of engagement, of being occupied. And without this noise, there is a sense of emptiness. But that emptiness is misunderstood. It is not a lack. It is space. Space that allows awareness to exist without distraction. Space that allows peace to emerge naturally, but because the mind is not used to it, it tries to escape it. And this is where the addiction begins. Not an obvious addiction, not something that feels harmful, but something that quietly takes over your inner state. The need to keep talking, the need to keep thinking, the need to keep filling every moment with some form of mental activity. This addiction is reinforced constantly, through conversations that never need to happen, through thoughts that repeat without purpose, through the habit of turning every moment into something that needs to be processed through words. And over time, this becomes normal. Silence begins to feel strange, uncomfortable, even empty, and noise begins to feel safe, familiar, necessary. But what is rarely noticed is how this constant noise disconnects you from yourself. Because when your mind is always occupied, there is no space to observe, no space to feel without labeling, no space to simply be present. You are always somewhere else, always in the next thought, the next sentence, the next conversation, and this movement keeps you away from stillness, because stillness requires space. It requires the absence of constant activity. It requires moments where nothing is happening, and in those moments, something deeper becomes visible. But when the mind is addicted to noise, those moments are avoided, filled immediately, replaced with more thinking, more talking, more internal dialogue. There is also a subtle loss of clarity that comes with this. When your mind is constantly active, it becomes harder to see things as they are. Everything is filtered through layers of thought, interpreted, analyzed, reconstructed, and this creates distortion. Because you are not experiencing things directly, you are experiencing your thoughts about them. And these thoughts are not always accurate. They are influenced by past experiences, by emotions, by assumptions. And when they are constant, they become your reality. You begin to live in your interpretations instead of in what is actually happening. This is how noise disconnects you from truth. not by removing it, but by covering it, by creating so much mental activity that the simple clarity of the present moment is no longer visible. There is also an emotional impact to this constant noise. When the mind is always active, it rarely settles. And when it does not settle, it cannot rest. It cannot process things fully. It cannot release what needs to be released, because it is always moving on to the next thought, the next conversation, the next internal dialogue. And this creates a kind of background tension, a low level of restlessness that never fully goes away. Not intense enough to be obvious, but present enough to affect your state. This is why, even in moments where nothing is happening, there can still be unease. Because the mind does not know how to be still. It does not know how to exist without noise. There is also a connection between constant talking and the need for control. When you are always expressing, always explaining, always engaging, there is a sense of managing the moment, of shaping it, of influencing how it unfolds. But this creates pressure, because you are not allowing things to be as they are. You are constantly interacting with them, constantly adding to them, and this prevents natural stillness. Because stillness requires letting go of the need to manage, to control, to fill. There is also a deeper realization that much of what is said is not necessary, not in a dismissive way, but in an honest way. Many words are spoken out of habit, out of discomfort with silence, out of the need to maintain a certain level of activity. And when you begin to see this, something shifts. You start to question the necessity of what you are about to say. You start to notice the impulse to speak before it becomes action. And in that noticing, you create space. Space where silence can exist. And in that silence, something changes. Your mind begins to slow down. The constant movement begins to reduce. And in that reduction, clarity begins to appear. Not as something you create, but as something that was always there beneath the noise. There is also a deeper connection to yourself that begins to emerge. When the noise reduces, you become more aware of your internal state, not through words, but through direct observation. You feel without labeling. You notice without analyzing. You are present without needing to describe the moment. And this presence creates a different kind of awareness, one that is not filtered through thought, one that is direct, clear, uncomplicated. There is also a sense of relief that comes with this, a release from the constant effort of maintaining mental activity. Because thinking requires energy, talking requires energy. And when this energy is constantly being used, it creates fatigue, not always obvious, but present, a kind of mental exhaustion that builds over time. But when the noise reduces, that energy is conserved. Your mind becomes lighter, less burdened, more at ease. There is also a shift in how you experience silence. It no longer feels empty. It feels full, full of awareness, full of presence, full of something that does not need to be expressed to exist. And this changes your relationship with it. You no longer avoid it. You begin to value it, to seek it, to allow it. Because you recognize that it is not a lack of something. It is the presence of everything that is not being covered by noise. There is also a deeper understanding that peace is not something you create. It is something that is revealed when noise is removed. It is always there, but it is often hidden beneath constant activity. And when that activity slows down, peace becomes visible, not as something dramatic, but as something simple. A quiet sense of being, a calm presence that does not need to be maintained, because it is natural. There is also a refinement in how you use words. They become more intentional, more aligned, because they are not being used to fill space. They are being used when necessary, when they add value, when they serve clarity. And this changes the quality of your communication. It becomes more meaningful, more precise, less diluted. Because it is not driven by the need to maintain noise. It is guided by awareness. There is also a deeper freedom in this. Freedom from the constant need to engage. freedom from the pressure to always have something to say, freedom from the habit of filling every moment. And this freedom creates space, space to rest, space to observe, space to simply be. And in that space, something else becomes possible. A deeper stillness, a stillness that is not forced, a stillness that is not created, a stillness that is revealed when everything unnecessary falls away. And as this becomes clearer, something else begins to unfold. A deeper awareness that silence is not just the absence of noise, it is the foundation of everything that feels like peace. And in that awareness, the need for constant talking begins to dissolve. Not through effort, but through understanding. Because once you see what noise is doing to you, you no longer need to escape silence. You begin to return to it. And as that noise begins to fall away, something unexpected starts to surface. Not from the outside, but from within your own experience of being seen. Because when you stop filling every moment with words, when you stop explaining yourself constantly, something changes in how others relate to you. They begin to interpret, to assume, to decide what you mean without you correcting them. And in that space, a quiet discomfort can arise. The feeling of being misunderstood. There is a moment that feels almost instinctive. A moment where someone sees you in a way that does not match what you know is true. And immediately, something inside you moves. A pull to correct it, to explain, to clarify, so that the image becomes accurate again. Because being misunderstood feels like being misrepresented. Like something about you has been reduced, simplified, or seen incorrectly. And the mind reacts to this as a problem, something that needs to be fixed. Something that needs to be corrected immediately. But what if it is not a problem? What if it is a form of protection? There is a kind of depth that cannot survive constant exposure, a kind of understanding that becomes weakened when it is forced into explanation for every situation, every person, every moment. Because not everyone sees with the same level of awareness. Not everyone listens with the same depth. And when something deep is explained in a shallow space, it does not become understood. It becomes reduced. It becomes simplified to fit the level of perception that is receiving it. And in that reduction, something is lost. This is where silence becomes protective, not because you are hiding, but because you are preserving. Preserving what is not meant to be interpreted by every mind. Preserving what is not meant to be explained in every context. Preserving what remains clear within you without being reshaped to fit external understanding. There is a quiet strength in allowing yourself to be misunderstood. Not because you enjoy it, but because you no longer fear it. You no longer feel the urgency to correct every perception. You no longer feel the need to adjust your expression so that it aligns with how others see you. You begin to accept that not everyone will understand you fully, and more importantly, that they do not need to. This acceptance creates freedom, because you are no longer tied to perception. You are no longer managing how you are seen. You are no longer shaping your truth to fit external views. You are simply grounded in what is clear within you. There is also a deeper realization that misunderstanding often reveals more about the other person than it does about you. Because when someone interprets you, they are not only seeing you, they are seeing through their own lens, their experiences, their beliefs, their assumptions, and this lens shapes what they see. So when they misunderstand you, it is not always a reflection of your expression. It is often a reflection of their perception. And trying to correct that perception does not always lead to clarity. Sometimes it only leads to more layers, more explanation, more attempts to align something that is not ready to align. This is where discernment becomes important again, knowing when clarity is possible and when silence is more appropriate. Because not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Some are better left as they are, not out of indifference, but out of awareness. Awareness that explanation in that moment would not bring true understanding. It would only create temporary alignment, surface agreement, without depth. There is also a deeper peace that comes from this. When you stop trying to control how you are perceived, your mind becomes lighter. There is less pressure, less need to monitor every interaction, less concern about how your words are interpreted, because you are no longer trying to achieve a certain image. You are simply being, and this being creates stability, a stability that is not affected by misunderstanding. Because your sense of self is not built on how others see you, it is built on your own clarity. There is also a shift in how you express yourself. When you are not trying to be understood by everyone, your words become more natural, less filtered, less adjusted. Because you are not shaping them for approval, you are expressing them from alignment. And this alignment carries a different kind of clarity, one that is not forced, one that is not trying to convince, one that simply exists, even if it is not fully understood. There is also a deeper respect that develops, not just from others, but within yourself, because you are no longer abandoning your depth to fit into shallow understanding. You are not reducing yourself to be more acceptable. You are not simplifying your truth to avoid being misunderstood. You are holding your depth with integrity, and that integrity strengthens your inner state because you are not compromising it for external clarity. There is also a refinement in how you engage with others. You begin to recognize who is capable of understanding and who is not as a judgment, but as awareness. And this awareness guides your expression. You share where there is depth. You remain silent where there is not. And this protects your energy, because you are not investing it in places where it will not be received. You are not explaining yourself repeatedly in spaces that cannot hold your understanding. You are choosing where to engage, and that choice creates balance. There is also a deeper understanding that being misunderstood is not always a negative experience. It can create distance, space. And that space can be beneficial because not everyone needs access to your inner world. Not everyone needs to understand your intentions. Not everyone needs to see you fully. And when there is distance, there is also protection. Protection from unnecessary judgment, from shallow interpretation, from being drawn into explanations that reduce your clarity. There is also a quiet confidence that develops. When you are comfortable being misunderstood, you become less dependent on validation, less affected by perception, less concerned with how you are seen. And this confidence is not loud, it is not something you display, it is something you feel, a steady sense of self that does not fluctuate based on external views. There is also a deeper connection to silence itself, because silence is no longer just a tool for managing reactions or preserving energy. It becomes a way of protecting your depth, a way of allowing what is true within you to remain undistorted, a way of not exposing everything to interpretation. And this creates a different kind of presence, one that is not fully visible, not fully explained, but deeply grounded. There is also a realization that not everything needs to be shared to be real. Not everything needs to be understood to be valid. Not everything needs to be expressed to exist. Some things are complete within you, and keeping them there does not diminish them. It preserves them. It allows them to remain whole, unchanged by external interpretation. There is also a sense of peace in letting go of the need to be fully known, because being fully known by everyone is not possible. And trying to achieve that creates constant effort, constant adjustment, constant explanation. But when you release that need, you allow yourself to exist without that pressure. You allow others to see you in their own way, and you remain grounded in your own understanding. There is also a deeper awareness that clarity does not always come from explanation. Sometimes it comes from presence, from how you carry yourself, from how you move through situations. And this kind of clarity does not need words. It is felt, even if it is not fully understood. And that is enough. As this becomes more natural, something else begins to unfold. A deeper realization that silence is not just protection from others, it is protection from becoming something you are not. Because when you stop explaining yourself to fit perception, you stop shaping yourself to match it. And in that, you remain true, unchanged, unreduced, whole. And as that comfort with being misunderstood begins to settle, something even more subtle comes into view. It is no longer only about allowing others to see you differently. It becomes about noticing how much of your life has been shaped by trying to control that very thing. Because long before words are spoken, before explanations are formed, there is already a quiet effort happening. An effort to be seen a certain way. An effort to avoid being seen another way. And this effort, though often invisible, carries weight. There is a quiet tension that follows you in many moments without you fully noticing it. It appears when you are about to speak, when you are about to act, even when you are simply present around others. A subtle question forms beneath everything. How will this make me look? It is not always loud. It does not always feel like pressure. Sometimes it feels natural, even responsible. A way of maintaining image, of managing perception, of presenting yourself correctly. But beneath that, there is something deeper, a constant adjustment, a quiet shaping of your behavior to match how you want to be seen. And over time, this shaping becomes a habit, so much so that it begins to feel like who you are. But there is a difference between who you are and the image you maintain. One is natural, the other is constructed. And the more energy you invest in the constructed version, the more distance you create from what is real within you. There is also a subtle exhaustion that comes from this, because maintaining an image requires constant awareness, constant monitoring, constant adjustment. You have to think about how you are being perceived, how your words are interpreted, how your actions are judged. And this creates a kind of mental strain, not always obvious but always present. A background effort that never fully stops, because perception is never fully in your control. No matter how carefully you present yourself, people will still see you through their own lens, their own beliefs, their own assumptions, their own limitations. And because of that, your image is always shifting in their minds, always changing, always being interpreted in ways you cannot fully predict. Yet the mind keeps trying to manage, trying to shape, trying to control something that cannot be controlled. And this creates tension, because you are investing energy into something unstable, something that is not fixed, something that is not entirely yours. This is where non-attachment begins, not as rejection of image, but as release from dependence on it. The realization that how others see you is not something you need to manage constantly, that your value is not defined by perception, that your identity is not dependent on interpretation. There is a quiet freedom in this realization, because when you let go of the need to control how you are seen, a weight lifts. You are no longer adjusting every moment. You are no longer filtering every word through the lens of perception. You are no longer shaping your behavior to fit an external expectation. You begin to move more naturally, more honestly, more in alignment with what is real within you. There is also a shift in how you experience interactions. When you are not focused on managing your image, you become more present, more engaged. Because your attention is not divided between being and appearing. You are not thinking about how you are being seen. You are simply there, and this presence changes everything. It creates authenticity, not as something you try to achieve, but as something that emerges when there is no effort to be anything else. There is also a deeper peace that comes from this, because you are no longer chasing approval, no longer avoiding judgment, no longer trying to maintain a certain perception. And this removes a significant source of internal pressure, because much of that pressure comes from trying to be seen in a specific way, trying to control something that is constantly shifting. But when you release that, your mind becomes quieter, less occupied, less concerned, more at ease. There is also a deeper understanding that image is not reality. It is a reflection, a projection, something that exists in the minds of others, not within you. And trying to control that reflection does not change what is real. It only creates more effort, more adjustment, more distance from yourself. This is why non-attachment to image brings clarity, because you are no longer confusing perception with truth. You are no longer measuring yourself based on how you are seen. You are grounded in what you know directly, in your own experience, in your own awareness. There is also a shift in how you handle judgment. When you are attached to your image, judgment feels personal. It feels like something that needs to be corrected, something that needs to be addressed. But when you are not attached, judgment becomes lighter, less impactful, because it is no longer tied to your sense of self. It is simply someone else's perspective, something that exists outside of you, and this creates space. Space to not react, space to not defend, space to remain steady. There is also a deeper sense of self-trust that develops. When you are not relying on external perception, you begin to rely more on your own understanding, your own clarity, your own awareness. And this trust strengthens your inner foundation, because you are no longer looking outward for confirmation. You are grounded within. There is also a refinement in how you express yourself. When you are not trying to manage your image, your expression becomes more direct, more honest, less filtered. Because it is not shaped by the need to be seen a certain way, it is shaped by what is true. And this creates a different kind of communication, one that is not about impression, but about alignment. There is also a deeper realization that image often limits you. Because when you are attached to how you are seen, you avoid actions that might change that image. You hold back, you adjust, you stay within certain boundaries, not because they are true for you, but because they maintain a certain perception. And this limits your growth. Because growth requires change. It requires movement beyond what is familiar, beyond what is expected. But when you are attached to your image, you resist that movement. You stay within what is safe, what is known, what is accepted, and this creates stagnation. Non-attachment removes that limitation. It allows you to move freely, to change, to evolve, without being restricted by how it will be perceived. There is also a quiet confidence that comes from this. Not the confidence of being seen a certain way, but the confidence of not needing to be. A confidence that is not dependent on approval, not influenced by judgment, but rooted in your own understanding. And this confidence is stable because it is not affected by external conditions. It remains, regardless of how you are seen. There is also a deeper connection to silence, because when you are not managing your image, you feel less need to explain, less need to justify, less need to correct perception. And this naturally leads to more silence. Not forced, but chosen, because there is nothing to prove, nothing to maintain, nothing to control. There is only presence. There is also a sense of ease in this, a lightness that comes from not carrying the weight of perception, not thinking about how you are seen, not adjusting constantly, but simply existing. And that ease creates peace. A peace that is not created through effort, but through release. Release of the need to control. Release of the need to manage. Release of the need to be seen in a certain way. There is also a deeper realization that who you are does not need to be displayed to be real. It does not need to be confirmed to exist. It does not need to be understood to be valid. It simply is. And when you rest in that, everything changes. Your interactions become simpler, your mind becomes quieter, your presence becomes more grounded, because you are no longer divided between being and appearing. You are unified, whole. As this becomes clearer, something else begins to unfold. A deeper awareness that silence is not just about protecting your inner world, It is about freeing you from the need to project it outward. And in that freedom, something remains, something steady, something real, something that does not need to be seen to exist. Silence was never emptiness. It was protection. It was clarity. It was the quiet space where everything unnecessary falls away and only what is real remains. Every time there was an urge to explain, something was being given away. Every time there was a need to be understood, something inside became unstable. But through stillness, something stronger emerged. A mind that no longer reacts instantly. A presence that no longer depends on validation. A clarity that does not need to be spoken to be true. And in that silence, peace was not created. It was revealed. Most people spend their lives trying to be heard. But the ones who find true inner peace learn something different. Not everything needs to be said. Not everything needs to be explained. Not everything needs to be understood by others to be real within you, and the moment that truth settles, everything changes. You move differently. You speak less, but with more meaning. You react less, but with more awareness. You carry less and feel more free. Now pause for a second. Out of everything you heard, what is one thing you will stop explaining from today? Not tomorrow. Today. Drop it in the comments. Let that be your first step into silence. And if this shifted something in you, subscribe, because what you are building here is not just knowledge, it is a mind that cannot be shaken.